Yakuza Kiwami 3 has been infamous since the second it was revealed in September of 2025 for a multitude of reasons. Even before its reveal, or when it was accidentally leaked prior to the reveal, the idea of Yakuza 3 getting a remake had been floating around in the community ever since the previous two entries, and Ishin, had gotten the same treatment. Yakuza 3 is a very controversial entry in the Yakuza series for multiple reasons. The game was notoriously rushed, and on the gameplay side of things, this led to an overall simplistic combat system, at least on the surface, and extremely low damage. The remastered version of the game, which is the version that most people have played, introduces a new bug that causes enemies to block extremely often. While this is not a game-breaking problem, it does cause problems on new game playthroughs when you don't have many skills, as well as for newer players who don't know how to mitigate the issue. As for the story, it is notably shorter than most other Yakuza games. It also contains many narrative shortcuts, and the orphanage sections can seem overly padded. However, many players actually adore Yakuza 3 in spite of, or sometimes even because of, these quirks. The combat system has quite some depth for those who wish to dig deeper into it. And even for more casual players, the game becomes much more fun when you unlock most of your abilities. And despite some stinkers, Yakuza 3 actually has some of the most varied and purposeful boss design in the entire series. Yakuza 3's story also receives praise despite its rushed areas. I would argue that the short development time actually benefited it overall, as it forced the writers to practice restraint, leading to a more focused and generally bloat-free narrative, which are aspects that the games with longer development time tend to struggle with. But of course, not everyone agrees with this, and may not be able to overlook the flaws in Yakuza 3's design and writing. And that's fine. Not everything will resonate with everyone. But this mixed reception is the primary reason, or at least the primary stated reason, behind RGG's decision to give Yakuza 3 its very own Kiwami remake. Kiwami means extreme, and I don't think anyone could have foreseen just how Kiwami the fallout of this one decision would be. Fast forward to now. Kiwami 3 is out, and the consequences of RGG's actions have all come to a head. Yakuza Kiwami 3 will go down in gaming history as a generationally bad video game on the level of DMC2 and Sonic 06. While it's nowhere near as bad as something like Big Rigs on a functional level, it is uniquely awful in other ways. The Yakuza series and RGG Studio were generally very highly regarded for their consistent quality over the past 20 years, and yet, that 2 decades worth of goodwill towards the games and the studio was eviscerated in the span of about 5 months by one Kiwami 3-shaped nuclear bomb. So what happened? This is not the first time that RGG has made a god-awful remake, and that didn't kill the series, so what was special about this one? Well, the problems with Kiwami 3 can be split into 2 groups, inherent and contextual. Inherent problems all have to do with the game itself, and do not account for external factors. Contextual problems, on the other hand, are concerned with these external factors. Things that have to do with the game's production, any controversies, etc. These are the problems that you have probably heard about, and have had the greatest impact on Kiwami 3's reception. Kiwami 3's contextual issues can be summarized in 3 groups: RGG's remake philosophy, artistry versus business, and most infamously, RGG's moral bankruptcy. That third bullet point is one to especially emphasize, as it was basically the beginning of the end. If you know anything about Kiwami 3, you're likely aware of Hamazaki's Japanese voice and face actor, Teruyuki Kagawa, and everything surrounding him and RGG Studio. Put briefly, Kagawa has gone on record for assaulting multiple women, a fact which became known to Western fans almost immediately after his inclusion in the game was announced. Yet, despite non-stop outcry for his removal, RGG has flagrantly ignored and silenced any critics, has refused to address the situation in any manner, and continued to plaster Kagawa's face over any and all marketing that Kiwami 3 received. And somehow, this isn't even the only instance of a quite literal bad actor being involved with this game. Damon Mills, the voice actor for Mine in the English dub, has a whole set of allegations against him. At best, this is grossly negligent on behalf of everyone involved, and could have been avoided with proper background checks. And while I believe this may be the case with Mills, more realistically for Kagawa, RGG wants to keep him in the game for some reason despite his behavior. Beyond the already present problems with artistic integrity, the situation with Kagawa adds tangible ethical issues into the mix, which takes things to a whole new level. And that's where a lot of people justifiably draw the line. So before this analysis can even start, we have a dilemma. Beyond the game being good or bad, is it okay to even buy Kiwami 3 to begin with? I don't know. I can't tell you how to spend your money, but you may come to find that you don't even want to buy it to begin with. I hope that for those who are simply curious to learn about the game, this review/analysis will suffice. At the very least, I am in the position where I may profit more from the game via YouTube than RGG did from my purchase. To wrap back to where we were, the other 2 points I mentioned also play a role in Kiwami 3's overwhelmingly negative reception. It's a bit harder to overview these without diving into the game proper, but to summarize, these points have to do with how RGG's business decisions affect how the Yakuza games are made. Specifically, how RGG chooses to go about remaking their old games, and what the intended purpose of these remakes are, and how RGG balances artistry with profitability. This video will not be focusing on these contextual problems until later. Instead, I want to begin by deeply analyzing how Yakuza Kiwami 3 works in a vacuum, removed from any outside factors. I will be looking at how Kiwami 3 functions as an entry in the Yakuza franchise, and as a remake of Yakuza 3, as well as all of the inherent problems that arise with how it goes about filling those roles. Later in the video, I will circle back to discussing the game in context. As much as I wish I could divorce the game from all of its outside issues, in this case, they are incredibly pervasive and integral to understanding why Kiwami 3 is the way it is. One final note before moving on is that this video will not be discussing Dark Ties. Dark Ties deserves to be looked at on its own, which I plan to do at a later date. And you can probably tell by this video's runtime that Kiwami 3 already has more than enough to talk about on its own. Before getting too far into things, I need to discuss methodology. It's one thing to just say, Yakuza 3 does X thing in Y manner, while Kiwami 3 does it in Z manner. But it's important to keep in mind RGG's own approach to creating Kiwami 3 in the first place. According to an interview with Ryosuke Hori, the head producer and director of the Yakuza series, RGG intends for Kiwami 3 to be a reimagining of the original Yakuza 3. Hori stated there would be no reason to make essentially the same game again with a new coat of paint. Instead, they took the opportunity to interpret the game's story and gameplay in a new way. They wanted to fix the issues that the original game had without creating an outright replacement for it.
Hello, I'm Hori, producer and director for Yakuza Kiwami 3 and Dark Ties. The game has evolved enormously, with loads of new cutscenes and newly added game elements. We didn't take the safe route by glorifying the past with a simple remake, but instead took a more aggressive approach to make Yakuza Kiwami 3.
It's a pretty noble philosophy for a remake, all things considered. Creating a remake that respects the original in this way and tries to fill its own role is something that can't be said about most of the ones on the market. Unfortunately, this interview had to be cut short due to the blazing inferno that had erupted on Hori's pants. To address the second elephant in the room, Yakuza 3 Remastered is no longer available to purchase on any digital storefront other than GOG. And Ryosuke Hori is a big fat liar. Does this mean that Kiwami 3 is supposed to replace the original? Well, we don't know for sure, but OG3's delisting and some other stuff we'll discuss later point to that being the case. So what gives? How is Kiwami 3 meant to both be an equal to and replacement for Yakuza 3? Is its very existence a paradox? I can't tell you. I really don't know. But you know who might? How about Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger? Erwin Schrödinger is best known for Schrödinger's cat, a thought experiment he created to help visualize the idea of a superposition in quantum mechanics. The basic idea of the experiment is as follows. If a cat is placed inside a box with some mechanism with the capability of killing it, then you won't know if it is alive or dead until you look inside of the box. According to quantum theory, when the cat is inside of the box and you have not looked inside to determine its status, it is in a so-called quantum superposition. In a quantum superposition, the cat can be thought of as both alive and dead simultaneously, because it is impossible to determine which is true without looking inside of the box. While Schrödinger's cat stems from quantum mechanics, the experiment has been co-opted by pop culture and adapted to fit a variety of analogous situations where something seems to be in two mutually exclusive states at once. And that's where Kiwami 3 comes in. Yakuza Kiwami 3 is Schrödinger's remake. It is meant to be an equal to Yakuza 3, as well as what makes it obsolete. In order to observe it and determine which is true, we must first analyze it as if it is a reimagining, and then as a replacement. And I can think of no better way to start than by just jumping right in. Just not quite into the full game. Like other recent Yakuza games, a public demo for Kiwami 3 was released shortly before the full game, which provides a small snapshot of the gameplay for players to try out before sinking their teeth into the full release. We did technically get some new story in the Kiwami 3 demo too. One of the big ways in which Kiwami 3 was advertised to differentiate itself from the original was in its inclusion of entirely new cutscenes and gameplay scenarios to help flesh out some of the characters and plot points that got the short end of the stick in OG3. And the segment of the game in the demo was specifically chosen to include both a remade segment from OG3 and a K3 original. I'll save this section for more general observations, but a surprisingly large amount about the final game can be discerned from the demo. We got to listen to a handful of new music tracks, got to experience many of the general combat mechanics, saw how some of the cutscenes were directed, and more. And people were not happy with it. For one, the lighting was completely botched. It seemed to be an issue that was carried over from Pirate Yakuza. The contrast is jacked up way too high, making almost everything look ugly and oversaturated. The cutscenes look fine, but normal gameplay is either way too bright or way too dark. The water texture in Okinawa is fucked up now too. Thankfully, this was something that RGG actually fixed before launch, and the lighting in the final game is fine, at least in terms of gameplay, though the cutscenes, we'll talk more about those later. We also got to see the performance of Rikiya's new actor. It leaves a lot to be desired, and I think I need to talk about the new face actors some more. Since Kiwami 3's reveal, one of the things that people were most angry about were the multiple recast characters. Apart from that one, Rikiya and Nakahara both received recasts. My best guess is that RGG wanted to bring in some big-name actors for the Japanese audience, as they usually do, and they wanted to replace some of the old custom characters with face scan actors. Now, face scanning was not new to RGG at the time of Yakuza 3, but it didn't become a mainstay until Yakuza 4. As such, most of the models for the major characters in 3 are original, which, to modern RGG, basically means free real estate for face actors. Now, for these characters specifically, the addition of new scenes means that they needed some new voice work, and I can understand the desire to not have a mix of old and new lines that may not even be by the same actor. However, the total replacement of the in-game model in these cases is wholly unnecessary. Though the situation with Rikiya is a bit more complex than that. Original Rikiya is voiced by Tatsuya Fujiwara. While Fujiwara made his debut in the Yakuza series as Rikiya's voice actor, he had another major role as Yuta in Yakuza 6. Yuta is not only voiced by Fujiwara, but is also modeled after him. RGG probably had some arbitrary rule where they wanted Rikiya to be a face scan model, but couldn't because his actor had already been face scanned for another character. That, or they didn't want to have Fujiwara play any other character now that he is a designated face actor for Yuta. As such, they needed a new voice actor for Rikiya, and didn't want to use his old model for whatever reason. This is the most reasonable explanation I can think of. I wonder if there are any other Yakuza 3 characters whose voice actor debuted in that game before getting another major role in Yakuza 6, where they were also used as a face actor. This entire thing gets a lot stupider when you remember that Kanda is in the exact same situation. His voice actor, Hiroyuki Miyasako, is also the voice and face actor for Nagumo in Yakuza 6. And yet, despite Kanda having more new scenes to record than Rikiya because of Dark Ties, Miyasako still voices Kanda, and he uses an updated version of his model from OG3. With this in mind, the only possible explanation I have for not getting Fujiwara to reprise his role is money, and maybe also time. The Kiwami titles already have a smaller budget than other Yakuza games, but from what I know, both Fujiwara and Miyasako are fairly high-profile actors, and cost a good bit of money to hire. Though from what I've heard, Fujiwara is an extremely popular A-list actor, while Miyasako isn't nearly at that level. Now, in Kiwami 3's case, this is just conjecture, but if true, then it means that Ryukyu was replaced due to Fujiwara either being too expensive or unavailable. And they somehow also didn't have the budget to find literally anyone else. The new guy they got to play Ryukyu is Sho Kasamatsu, and he does a mixed job at playing the character. He doesn't really look or sound the part. Part of what made Ryukyu such an endearing character in Yakuza 3 is the way he looks. This guy looks like he wouldn't hurt a fly. His complexion is very soft, but other than that, he really does just look like a normal guy. And it makes sense when this guy just wants to be your friend. So what do we do when we have to replace him in the remake? Let's cast the pretty boy with a bad case of resting bitch face. The cutscene animation doesn't do him any favors either. That's not his fault, but it exacerbates the problems that come with what is already a miscasted performance. As for Kasamatsu's vocal delivery, he doesn't do that well either. It lacks the charm and goofiness of Fujiwara's performance. This could just be poor voice direction, but it seems like Kasamatsu is far too into the cool guy voice, and it just comes across as lacking in expression. Let me play part of the tattoo scene back to back for you, as I feel like this is extremely evident there.
なかなか立派な蛇だな。
違うわボケ蛇じゃねえよハブハブだハブ捨て頃のハブっつってんだろ
なかなか立派な蛇だな。
違うわボケ蛇じゃねえハブハブだハブ捨て頃のハブだっつってんだろ
Now, I don't mean to diss Kasamatsu as an actor. I'm sure he's fine. He's just a horrific miscast for Ryukyu. It's not entirely his fault, like I said. Something immediately noticeable is the rehashed cutscene animation. This isn't the first time that RGG has done this, but it's really bad here. You probably noticed during the comparison that Kiwami Ryukyu is just way less expressive. That's no fault to the actor, that's a consequence of the jerry-rigged animation port that they've done. It plagues the entire game whenever a cutscene is reused, and all of the newly animated scenes are immediately discernible by their much improved quality. This is not to say that Yakuza 3's cutscene animation is bad, it just doesn't work as well in this engine and with the higher quality models. So how does the actual game feel to play? Well, it's hard to say from the demo, as it's only a small portion of the game, but it feels odd. Expect a lot of my thoughts on the combat to be front-loaded here. It's the main focus of the demo to begin with, and it'll allow me to be more focused when talking about the full game, where I'll go over more specific things like upgrading, difficulties, and boss design. Players noted that the Dragon of Dojima style looked very off ever since the game's reveal. It's a hodgepodge of disparate attacks that have been stitched together with no rhyme or reason, and it feels equally as clunky to use. I will admit that this game's use of hold attack cancelling is a really cool idea that does help the skill ceiling somewhat, but that only does so much to help the fundamental problems with the style. Why is the old backward quickstep now the forward one? Why is the forward one now the back? You have a fifth light attack now, which is super slow and obviously tacked on. The first three light attacks are from the Dragon Engine style, but the fourth one is from the old engine version. No more bounding throws unless you go into Dragon Boost where you're forced to do nothing but bounding throws. No more heavy grab attack. Now you do the Dragon Engine throw, except it's twice as long now. The actual throw is a copy and paste from fucking Crane style of all places. Your heavy hold attacks are ripped from Agent style and Gaiden because what's continuity, am I right? Same deal with your heavy kick. It's now a two-part attack that very obviously jump cuts to another Gaiden animation for a finisher attack. Your light running attack is the one from Gaiden, which is fine, but your heavy running attack is the one from Yakuza 5. Not the most recent Kiryu game, and not the very game that Kiwami 3 is a remake of, Yakuza 5. At the end of the day, it's not a very good feeling style, but I guess it is still functional. It's not absolute torture to use, and at the very least, it is noticeably faster than its Gaiden counterpart, and the general combat mechanics help soften the blow of what would otherwise be a miserable style to use. So what about the other style? Ryukyu style may be my least favorite fighting style in the whole series, at least conceptually. And I'm gonna have to ask you to bear with me here for a minute. I promise this video is not going to just be me losing my shit over every little thing that Kiwami 3 does differently from the original. I am quite a bit more charitable towards this game than most people, and will give credit where it's due. But the weapon style is one of the few things that makes me legitimately mad. It already loses a lot of points just by being so fucking stupid that it makes the entire game just that much worse. This is not the first time they've made a sort of out-there fighting style. There have been kind of silly ones in the past as far back as Breaker in Yakuza 0, but Ryukyu's style is the first time they have utterly failed to justify its existence. Agent and Sea Dog are both completely insane concepts, but what saves them is that the Secret Spy style is in the Secret Spy game, and the Pirate style is in the Pirate game. It's that simple. It makes sense in those instances because the styles are made to fit the context of the game that they're in. Why am I suddenly expected to not question why Kiryu has randomly decided to start doing his best impression of Tung 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 Sahur while in a fight to the death? One possible counter-argument to this is that weapons have always been a part of the series, including in Yakuza 3. Nothing is stopping you from mag-dumping Mine without throwing a single punch. What about it being a full-on style suddenly makes it bad? Well, let me ask you this. If RGG suddenly decided to make a Kiwami 0 and gave Majima the Sea Dog style from Pirate Yakuza, would that be a good thing? Majima can already use swords and guns in 0, so what would be the problem with that? The problem is that it would make no fucking sense. It is not in character for Majima to centralize his fighting strategy around using cutlasses, a flintlock pistol, and a hook, at least not at that point in time. From a characterization standpoint, Kiryu has only ever used weapons opportunistically, up until kind of Gaiden. He always prefers to stay bare-handed unless the opportunity arises for him to use something like a bike to crush someone's spine. At least for Kiryu, weapons were almost always included simply to make the game more fun. Making a weapon style a central part of Kiryu's game plan is not in line with his character at all, especially when this is not a problem in the very game that this is remaking. Imagine Kiryu going, "I will defeat you, Mine, but wait, let me pull out my bowl and back scratcher first." And what's worse is that, while I can't get a full impression since this is only the demo, it doesn't even compensate by feeling good to use. Its attacks are slow. Its quickstep is slow. All of its hold cancels are slow. It has the same command grab issue in Dragon Boost as Dragon of Dojima. It has a single reversal that ends combos immediately. Its running attacks are terrible, and the list goes on. It leaves a very poor impression, at least here in the demo. It's difficult to tell how good it is for crowds from the demo since your damage is through the fucking roof, so we'll look at that in the full game. One thing that this game does have is block canceling for whatever reason, so it's possible to combine block and hold attack cancels to actually speed up the style. Unfortunately, this is a level of execution that I do not expect the average player to get to, so I won't be giving it too many points for that. A big part of the advertising for this style was the fact that you have access to 8 weapons in total. I'm not going to bother learning the proper names for some of these, and some of them don't even have listed names in-game, but the list of weapons is the shield and poke stick, the sais, the mini scythes, the tonfas, the knuckles, the nunchucks, the paddle, and the surujin. Yes, that's technically 9, but who cares? Just because there are 8 weapons stated to be usable, not all of them are created equal. The shield and poke stick are both exclusive to the rush combo and the block attacks, as well as 5ST and 5S2T. The sais and mini scythes are exclusive to finishers, the tonfas are for the heavy combo string, the knuckles are a 3-hit combo string on the grab button, which is super slow and only useful for the heat action. The nunchucks are essentially an auto combo and nothing else. The paddle is another basic string, and the surujin is just a big dumb crowd control attack. So in reality, despite the multitude of weapons, it's little more than a glorified regular moveset. I suppose I can talk about heat actions in this segment as well. There are a handful in the demo, many of which are the standard reuses for basic actions, which is par for the course for this series. However, it does have some notable changes to heat actions as a whole. There are some new ones, of course, especially for a Ryukyu style, though some of the new heat actions now have completely seamless camera transitions. Additionally, some old heat actions have received new visuals. As for the new seamless heat actions, I'm not a fan. I get the idea, but I think it just looks worse in most cases. The absolute lack of cuts is overly restrictive and reduces the quality of the camera work overall. Heat actions have generally included very deliberate and cinematic camera work, not only to make them feel more dynamic, but also to help make the animation flow more naturally and help sell the impact of certain visual effects. And RGG knows this because the new wall heat action uses a jump cut to a specifically chosen camera angle in order to increase the visual impact. Instead of this artistic camera work we see in previous games and in other heat actions in this game, the new seamless heat actions look like a bystander's iPhone recording. In fact, I do have a direct comparison for this. This heat action is a copy of one from all previous Kiryu Dragon Engine games, except the camera work has been removed. I don't think this style of heat action is completely awful. I think the nunchuck heat action is pretty good due to it being relatively stationary, even if the visuals aren't great at selling the impact. But I feel like these heat actions are yet another consequence of the lacking budget and dev time that I suspect this game had. But to look at some of the other new heat actions, there's the new wall heat action in DoD, like I said, but it feels kind of unnecessary when we already had a super cool wall heat action that goes for the same effect. It would have been nice if we could have had both of these. There's a stun heat action in each style, with DoD's being the one from OG3, though the visual effects have seen a significant downgrade. The original slap had very heavy VFX applied to it in order to sell just how much power was behind it. The new VFX don't look nearly as powerful and don't sell the heat action as an ultimate attack. The weapon style version is laughably anticlimactic, all that build up just for a sweep and a downward hit. Ryukyu style also has its own Dragon Finisher variant in Dragon Boost. The DoD version is just the one from Gaiden, which is fine, while the Ryukyu style version is just the most intense game of Ultimate Frisbee ever recorded. Once again, I dislike it on principle, but at least it looks cool enough. I think that's enough heat action talk for now, and I'll wrap up this combat discussion by talking about the general combat mechanics that can be discerned from this demo. Sadly, I think Kiwami 3 is a bit all over the place when it comes to this. Juggling is included in this game, but it's somehow even worse than it was in Pirate Yakuza. It retains the hit limit from the previous two real-time games, and juggles will often just drop if you're too close to a wall. This is a glitch as far as I'm aware, and it only affects face-down launchers, but it is still in the final game. Unfortunately, Kiryu's only face-up launcher is S2T in Ryukyu style, which isn't the most reliable. And beyond that, bosses are almost completely immune to being juggled when in heat mode. It's felt like RGG has been wanting to move past juggling for a while now, and it's gotten to the point where I question why they even bothered putting it in the game to begin with. Especially when they finally implemented a proper alternative that was mostly absent from Gaiden and Pirate Yakuza. In Gaiden, you had to circumvent the juggle limit by abusing the fact that the timer resets every time the enemy hits the ground, making rejuggles the best option on bosses that it actually worked on, and you can't do that in Pirate Yakuza. In that game, your only option is to use an extremely niche setup that tricks the AI into letting you combo it. At the very least, though, you're much more agile in Pirate Yakuza, so scrapping doesn't feel nearly as sluggish. But apart from that, RGG seems to be trying to reintroduce actual ground combos into this game, and a new mechanic allows you to knock enemies out of heat mode. This appears to be a generalization of a mechanic in Yakuza 3, where certain bosses like Majima, Joji, and Mine will cycle in and out of heat mode. The new mechanic even parallels how heat modes worked in OG3, as bosses will take reduced hit stun in heat mode there as well. Designing a new gameplay mechanic for a remake in a way that respects and expands upon the original source material is actually a really good choice and is something that I will applaud RGG for. But, like with most good things in this game, it comes with an asterisk. The hit limit still applies to ground combos, which artificially limits how much you can actually do when you do get an opening. RGG has been desperately trying to get rid of infinite combos, or even just really long ones in general, since basically forever. And they're really bad at it. The players will always find a way. But all of these new anti-infinite measures also affect how the game plays normally. The hit limit is way too strict, and discourages any creativity. It essentially removes the reward that comes from being able to completely shit on a boss after taking the time to really learn how they work. If you're too good at the game, Yokoyama personally comes to your house and hands you a "you've been cut off" card. A slight workaround has been found via stunning the enemy. Stun mechanics have been changed in Kiwami 3 compared to other Dragon Engine games. With the introduction of the hit limit in Gaiden, stun combos essentially ceased to exist, and it didn't help that stuns in Gaiden and Pirate Yakuza are extremely difficult to achieve. And now in Kiwami 3, the hit limit is still there, but stuns are now much more accessible and have also been changed to last an extremely long time. Now, if you stun a boss, they will be vulnerable to all kinds of hits until the stun ends, even when the hit limit kicks in and the boss gains armor. There's still no known way to extend this once the stun ends, as the limit will just kick in a second time, and while the boss is stunned and enraged, you're basically just hitting a statue. But this is at least something. I think that's where I'll stop discussing the combat for now, but we'll revisit it later. There's only one more thing I like to go over for the demo: the music. Not counting karaoke or any of the MIDI ringtones, there's 3 new tracks for us to listen to: the battle themes for the 2 styles, and a remix of Pure Malice from OG3. Pure Malice is a bit more interesting to discuss because we have something to directly compare it to, but it also unveils one of the biggest criticisms I've seen about Kiwami 3's music direction. Before looking at Pure Malice in detail, I need to give some context. Yakuza 3 had a very distinctive musical style. It built off of the very crunchy, grunge-inspired feel of the first 2 games in a very interesting way that no other game in the series has really tried to replicate. When it comes to Kiwami 3, its approach to adapting OG3's music differs from how the other Kiwami games chose to adapt the music from their respective source games. Kiwami 1 and 2 have received a lot of flack for their approaches towards music. Kiwami leaned heavily into EDM and techno influences, which worked for some of the remixed tracks, but was laughably bad for others. Kiwami 2, on the other hand, went for outright replacement in most cases. It's already bad enough to essentially erase parts of a game by excluding them in a much more accessible remake, but it's even worse in Kiwami 2's case, as almost all of the replacement tracks are considered inferior to their originals. So, what does Kiwami 3 do? Well, we have a mix of the 2 approaches. The 2 style themes have essentially replaced Bruise and Ryukyu humming from OG3, while Pure Malice is, of course, a remix. But how exactly does Kiwami 3 go about its remixes? That's surprisingly hard to answer because there's very little consistency across the board. I'd say there's a general adherence to late 2000s rock and metal, which makes sense, but how this influence applies to individual tracks is sometimes hard to tell. Luckily for Pure Malice, it's very apparent. And wow, over half an hour in and I've only finished talking about the demo. But I think it's important to set the stage for what we can expect going into the full game. And to summarize the first impressions from the demo, we were in for questionable actor performances, poorly animated cutscenes due to a botched porting job, significantly worse lighting than a game from 17 years ago, a confusing and overly restrictive gameplay system that at least had a couple of good ideas, and a mixed bag of a soundtrack. Not the greatest impression to leave. But surely, it couldn't get that much worse, right? At worst, the game is just kind of ugly, not very fun, and has a mediocre soundtrack. Those exact descriptors apply to Kiwami 2 as well, and that game didn't kill the franchise. So while the game seems like it won't be of great quality, it still seems like a 5 out of 10 at worst. And that's when the leaks came out. Kiwami 3 saw a frankly unprecedented amount of leaks. The entire script of the game leaked, first of all, meaning that, for those who really wanted to, they could look and see just what had changed in Kiwami 3. I won't go over this since I'll be talking about the plot in more detail already, but just know that people were not happy. Various new segments of the game were spread around, and it caused outrage, further sullying what was already anticipated to be a very divisive release. A lot of cutscenes and gameplay segments leaked early, showcasing more of the bad lighting and animation ports. A few of the music tracks also leaked, and while these weren't universally reviled, just like the tracks in the demo, their quality and direction were all over the place. I'll discuss all of these things when we get to them in the actual game, but on top of all of these leaks, we got some extra information about Kiwami 3 from various review publications in the days prior to release. Apparently, Dark Tides was much shorter than advertised. The orphanage sections from the original game had all been swept into side content or removed entirely. 3/4 of the sub-stories from OG3 had been cut. The Reapers were now a carbon copy of the bounties from Pirate Yakuza, and the list goes on and on. Many publications were not too keen about the game overall. However, I'd like to point to a particularly venomous review by Ashley Schofield of Video Games Chronicle, who gave it 2 stars out of 5. Schofield echoes the criticisms that I and many others had parsed from the demo. The combat styles felt directionless, the recast actors are downgrades from the original, the reused animations look bad, all of that still applies here. But not only is this article where some of the new information about the sub-stories and Reapers and such was revealed, but it also discusses some of the more sinister elements that will become more important later. All of this coming out in the days and weeks prior to the launch of Kiwami 3 led the eventual release date of February 11th/12th, 2026 to be a particularly ominous day. And well, I think it's time to give the full game a look. But there's still a few things to look at before actually starting the game. We have a title screen to look at. It's basically the same as the demo, but it made more sense to discuss here. First of all, I love this artwork that they have for Kiryu and Mine. Kiryu's pose being a direct reference to the original Y3 box art, or at least the remastered version without the cigarette, is exactly what I would have wanted, as well as Mine's pose being a parallel to said box art. The grayscale color palette is a nice touch that adds to the overall contrast. RGG actually choosing to abstract their characters on their box art instead of slapping them on the cover and calling it a day is a relatively recent thing. I'd argue that this started in Gaiden with the very deliberate use of harsh shadows to contrast the white background. And this extends to Infinite Wealth, where everyone is in the golden color palette of the infinity symbol. Pirate Yakuza didn't get the memo, but I'm glad they did it again here. Another thing I'll praise is the dynamic menu music. A lot of the games do a thing where a less intense version or portion of the theme plays on the title screen, before then crescendoing upon entering the menu. Kiwami 3 does a similar thing, though its title and menu themes are actually under 2 different titles. The one on the title screen is The Roar of the Dragon and Kirin, while the menu theme is Pulse of the Dragon and Kirin. A few notes before I actually start the game. I did my playthroughs on standard difficulty, so any thoughts that I have about the game apply to that unless stated otherwise. I really don't recommend playing this game on professional for reasons I will discuss. Additionally, I played on the Japanese dub of the game, both because this series' track record with English dubs is pretty terrible, and because it gives me a direct comparison to the original. There's also a Chinese dub. I don't know much about the Chinese dub, but I did play the demo with it, and I thought it was pretty good. And the last thing I have to say is a small disclaimer. This video will not be focusing on the side content of both of the games, and will mostly be concerned with the main aspects of Kiwami 3, being its story and gameplay. The way that Kiwami 3 goes about its side content is a whole can of worms, and it's really bad for the most part, and I will talk about it when applicable. But once again, the majority of this video will be concerned with the story and gameplay. And with all of that said, let's finally start the game. We already have a big, glaring problem, sometimes quite literally. This game looks like shit! In many different ways, and in many different scenarios. The first thing in the game is the scene with Kiryu and Haruka on the beach, and it is far too bright. When it comes to daytime scenes, this is an exception to the rule. I think most of them look fine, but this one is a bit much. But somehow, all of the other cutscenes in the prologue are ugly in their own ways. Right after the beach scene, we get the first cutscene to take place at sunset. In the original game, I'm not gonna pretend like sunset looked perfect. The characters are a bit too reflective, but I still think it looks really good. Kiwami 3 is what happens after Yokoyama watches a bit too much Better Call Saul. This game is really bad about its filters. Sunset scenes being doused in Sunny D is the only time this applies to cutscenes, thankfully, at least the pre-rendered ones. But this game is also notorious for the garish blue filter over Kamurocho that makes it look like the lost city of Atlantis. These kinds of filters have been in the Dragon Engine games since Kiwami 2, and in almost all cases, they look like shit. It extra sucks because anywhere other than Kamurocho does not have this filter, and consequently, looks a whole lot better. Of course, the original game also had no such filter and looks perfectly fine. Back to cutscenes. Just by looking at what is presented to us in the prologue, we get a grab bag of shit. We've already seen the light of the heavens.
Behold! The power of God. God's glory. It's so bright. So bright. No.
And we've already taken a vacation to Tijuana, but it doesn't end there. Next is the Daigo car scene. Did you know that in Yakuza 3, this scene had dynamic lighting that reacted to the lights of other cars and streetlights on the road? Did you know that this does not return in Kiwami 3? OG3's version is also much darker, implying a later time of day, which fits the tone of the scene much better. Now, I will say that this scene still looks pretty good in Kiwami 3, but it highlights one of the major nuances of remakes that often divides their reception: the lack of attention to detail. Ask any Metal Gear fan what they think about Delta, and they'll probably either go, yeah, I thought it was cool, or they'll start ranting about how it poisoned their water supply, burned their crops, and delivered a plague into their houses. And both groups have a point. I just finished playing Delta recently, and I have played the original. Delta is a functional game, but NGS3 has such a unique identity that just doesn't feel quite as there in the remake. And it's a sentiment that is echoed with a lot of remakes nowadays, including with Kiwami 3. The lighting is not exclusively an attention to detail issue, and it's not the only way in which this game falters in that respect. But I want you to keep this in mind for the rest of the video when something comes across as small or nitpicky. It's fine if it's only a handful of things, but you'll soon come to find that almost everything in this game is nothing short of a hack job. And remember, this is supposed to be a full-on reimagining of Yakuza 3, because 17 years ago, they didn't have the technology to make it look this ass. The next cutscene is where Daigo gets shot, and also doesn't look too bad, which is quite surprising considering how 99% of nighttime scenes look in this game. We'll get to that. For now, let's touch on actor performances some more. The vast majority of characters in this game simply reuse their actors' performances from the original. Some characters see their actors return for some additional dialogue, and some actors have been completely replaced as we know. However, some of the voice actors have sadly passed away since Yakuza 3's release. One such actor is Tetsuya Watari, the voice of Joji Kazuma. It's unclear if RGG would have wanted to do something more with Joji, but it's certainly possible considering that there is at least one character with a deceased voice actor that they did add something for. For now, the other present characters in this scene, Daigo and Richardson, do reuse their lines from the original. Yes, the roof has remained untouched. There is one character that did actually get a re-record though, and it's none other than Kiryu himself. I wasn't able to tell the difference in most scenes, if they were even different at all, though there are two areas where I can definitely tell they got Kuroda to redo his lines, which I'll bring up when we get to them. Just a few more things before moving into Chapter 1 proper. When Daigo gets shot, they added a blood spurting effect, which looks really bad and takes away from the tension that this scene is meant to have. After Daigo gets shot, there's nothing but silence as he slowly sinks to the ground. But the blood spurting takes away from the shocking stillness that is supposed to be the main point of the scene. Wow, this title card looks bad. But that aside, Chapter 1 starts in the cemetery just like the original. Contrary to many areas in this game, I think the cemetery actually looks quite good. You get the standard story recaps here, and there's nothing really to say about them, though in the English and Chinese dubs of the game, the respective Kiryu voice actors voice over the original cutscenes which are still in Japanese. This is likely because no pre-existing English dub of the Kiwami games exists, and these recaps are far too long to justify doing a full dub over for something that most players are likely to completely skip. But it's still a bit odd. I'm gonna have a counter in the corner for things in this game that make it obvious that the devs did not have enough time or budget to make it, and while I don't think this quite counts, I can still add one for the terrible lighting job on most cutscenes. Speaking of cutscenes again, here's the first major change. One of the Dragon Engine's staples is this sort of half cutscene. It's a step up from the standard text boxing, where characters are fully voiced and have some degree of animation. A lot of text box scenes from the original game have been adapted to this format. I'd say that this is mostly a good change, were it not for an enormous blunder on Kiwami 3's behalf. I can't hear anything! A lot of the in-game cutscenes in Kiwami 3 have very poorly mixed music. Not only does it tend to drown out the character's speech, but it can also be extremely overbearing or unfitting of the scene's tone. In the case of this scene with Sayama, I think the music choice is fine, but it's still way too loud. Another thing that is present in this scene that applies to the entire game is the new translation that it has received. A lot of the dialogue in this game is very subtly different from the original, and in this case by original I specifically mean Yakuza 3 Remastered, which has a different and overall better translation than the PS3 version. In most cases, it's a pretty unnoticeable change, but there are some instances where the dialogue in the Kiwami translation has been changed to be much less effective. This actually seems to be a consequence of RGG copying over the English dub subtitles into the Japanese dub, which can lead to some incongruity. That doesn't really apply here, just be aware of it for later. There is still a key difference here in the overall tone of the dialogue. In the original, when Sayama tells Kiryu that she is moving to America, the dialogue makes it sound like the prospect of Kiryu and Sayama getting together has been completely shot down. However, this new translation changes that. Between things like Sudo stating that she is simply prioritizing her career, or Sayama herself saying that she might just show back up someday, it makes it sound like it's not an impossibility for them to end up together at some point. This seems intentionally done to line up with her lifelink scene in Infinite Wealth. Even if this is a relatively small change, I think it's actually a very good one to make. One of the biggest criticisms that I and many others have about Kiryu's writing is how he is somehow still caught up on everyone's favorite cardboard cutout Yumi after almost 20 years. If the Infinite Wealth ring scene is meant to represent Kiryu laying his final regret with Yumi to rest, then the aforementioned lifelink and the changes made to this scene may mean that they're finally deciding to let Kiryu and Sayama get together. After this, we make it to Kamurocho and officially start playing. You don't get to do too much though. In the original, the first tutorial fight was outside of the Emoto clinic after talking to Yuya. In Kiwami 3, it is now before Yuya, and you get to walk about 15 feet before getting stopped in your tracks. I don't have much to say about this tutorial fight, other than that you do have access to your max combo speed from the get-go, which is always nice. The talk with Yuya is another scene that's gotten the Kiwami treatment, and I think it's fine. But upon going to visit Kazuki, we get the original tutorial fight, which has now been split in two for whatever reason. But hey, we unlock upgrades after this, and I need a second to talk about these. This upgrade system is not very good. It splits up health, attack, and ability upgrades, which is a good thing that has been done for the previous games, but there are three main issues here. 1. There's a set upgrade order. You're forced to buy a ton of bullshit in order to get to the things you actually want. You have to buy at least 5 things before you can buy the basic ground heat action, and you have to buy at least 9 things to unlock the second quickstep. A lot of older Yakuza games, including Yakuza 3, had this system, and I was never a big fan of it. Recent games have given you the ability to buy pretty much whatever you want whenever you want, so why have this arbitrary restriction? 2. Basic actions are now locked behind upgrades. Stuff like the ground heat action, like I said, but even worse, things like taunts, the heavy grab attack, and the ability to break out of grabs at all are locked behind upgrades, some of which are very late in the order. And finally, dual currency upgrades. This has been a thing since Gaiden, and it has always been a horrible system ever since that game. And in this game, you have training points. These are tied to the completion list, and you get them very slowly. I had to grind these out for a different reason, which we'll get to in a bit, but even with the insane grind I had to do, I still could not fully upgrade myself until near the end of the game. Back to the story, we talk to Kazuki as usual, though this scene is unfortunately plagued by more loud and overbearing music, which also extends into the talk with Emoto shortly after. Unlike the original, spending time with Haruka in Kamurocho is completely forced. Now, that's not inherently a bad thing, but it's used as an excuse for the phone tutorial! This tutorial starts out fine, but it quickly obliterates the pacing of this chapter by forcefully interjecting some unfunny bullshit that you can't skip. And the cherry on top of the shit cake is the game going, "Hey guys, I made a reference to a future game. Get it? You get it? We're funny, right? Don't you get it?" You're forced to go do some karaoke with Haruka, and I picked the obvious choice. That being said, why is the Bakamitai picture still Pocket Fighter? Why is it not the dog? You know, the dog that came from Yakuza 3. Anyways, once you get out, it's nighttime. That's a bit odd since in OG3 it was sunset at this point, but that's not a huge deal. Or it wouldn't be if nighttime wasn't so ugly. We send Haruka back to the Emoto clinic and meet Nishida outside the Millennium Tower. Here's another Kiwami 3 original, and it's something else that I actually do like. In OG3, you would speak to Nishida and then go up and fight Majima. However, you now fight Nishida and some other Majima family goons first. It's a neat addition, and Nishida doing a Majima impression in the scene prior to the fight is fucking hilarious. As for the fight itself, it's a perfectly serviceable introductory boss. Nishida himself is a really weird mix of moves. He's based on Kanai for some reason, but he also has moves from Kanda and a few others, I believe. That's not a K3 criticism though, because that's the moveset they gave him in Pirate Yakuza. Now we go to the Majima fight, and oh, it's bad. The cutscene, I mean. This is the default brightness, by the way. How the fuck did they make this scene this fucking dark? It doesn't help that the sky is now a black void instead of being lit by the city. It's extremely ugly, and somehow the fight itself is even worse. Do I even have to explain why this is bad? This isn't even just bad by remake standards, this is bad by video game standards. There's no way that something this ugly made it into a $60 release. The sheer darkness mixed with such a heavy-handed blue filter makes the entire thing look like you just turned on a colorblind filter without actually being colorblind. It's washed out and slathered in gray. The top of the Millennium Tower is by far one of the ugliest areas in the game. I am once again questioning how they made this exact same thing look significantly better 17 years ago. That aside, we also get our first look at the boss intros in this game. In the original Yakuza 3, only Mine had a dynamic intro, as he was the first boss to ever include one. The rest of the bosses all had preset animations that were accompanied by a couple panning camera angles. I always thought these were fine, but I would very much welcome the addition of new dynamic intros were Kiwami 3 to ever happen. And now that it has, they didn't do that. Every single boss, except for one, reuses the original intro animation, now with some fancy camera work to make it look like a dynamic intro. To varying success. Majima 1's intro is actually quite reserved with its camera work compared to the others, and I think that works to its benefit. It's just enough to make it feel more, well, dynamic, but it's not overbearing. Overall, I think this is pretty good compared to some of their other attempts at adapting the intro animations. That said, Majima does this goofy little dance but is trying to be serious. It's a bit dissonant, and it's not helped by the fact that pretty much all intros have no voice lines whatsoever. This is a problem with all of these pseudo-dynamic intros, which fellow Yakuza YouTuber Cosimo has done a side-by-side comparison of. I suppose the voice lines would conflict with Majima's more serious expression in this version, but it's still a bit odd and doesn't excuse the silence in the other intros. Speaking of adaptations, what about the new remix of Receive and Stab You? As for how the fight itself is, it's a bit hard to make any broad statements about anything yet. The fight is quite bare bones by design. The original was too, and this is still just Chapter 1. I'm also going to refrain from discussing boss combat as a whole until later, when they start to get more difficult and I start to get more upgrades and more comfortable with the systems. For now, Majima now uses a stripped down version of his Pirate Yakuza Mad Dog moveset. That basically just means he's using Thug with one Pirate Yakuza move. It's not a super in-depth fight, but once again, that's not something I can fault it too much for. The only thing that I will highlight is the complete removal of Feel the Heat. It wasn't a super complex system in 3, as it basically just gave you access to one of 3 special heat actions towards the end of the fight, but either way, it's nowhere to be found here. After another cutscene with Majima that is still way too dark, Chapter 1 isn't over yet. This is where it ends in the original, but there's a bit more that Kiwami 3 adds here. And I really wish they didn't. The first thing is a new cutscene with Kashiwagi that solely exists to retcon the Reaper system from the original game. And the entire system is just a copy and paste from bounties in Pirate Yakuza. Let's not forget AD 1118 bug fix either. This is a text error that every single player is going to encounter. How did this make it in the final release? But finally, with one final cutscene to round things out, Chapter 1 is complete. But wait, let's take a look at that. I think this is a pretty neat cutscene of Majima giving Kiryu a farewell. It's a bit bright, but I think it's a great way to end the chapter. Or it would be if not for a very strange comment by Kiryu himself. After seeing this gesture by Majima, Kiryu's first instinct is to tell Haruka, "I can't wait to get the hell out of here," because he just doesn't care about Majima, I guess. This is the perfect place to shoehorn in a line where he says, "Looks like Kamurocho will be in good hands," or something like that. This just makes him sound ungrateful and is really out of character for no real reason. Wow, these kids do not have souls. And why is the dog here? You don't find the dog until much later on, or at least you didn't in the original. But oh wait, that got removed, as did most of the orphanage stories. I'll talk more in detail about this when the orphanage stuff is formally introduced in the next chapter. To complement the game a bit, Sunset actually looks way better in-game compared to cutscenes. There's still a noticeable orange filter, but it's much milder and actually helps sell the visual. But just as I have one good thing to say about this game, it slaps me in the face with more corny cutscene music. The Izumi scene on the beach is a really sweet one that helps clue the player into what Kiryu's life is like at Morning Glory, and what his relationships with his kids are like.
私が施設で暮らしてるの知ってるし、おじさんが本当のお父さんじゃないことも知ってる。
I'm not gonna say that this scene is ruined, but it hurts it greatly. It plays during what is also a brand new portion of the scene, which seems to be shot and acted quite well otherwise. Upon transitioning to the original pre-rendered part of the cutscene, it uses much less obtrusive music that fits much better anyway. Morning Glory is certainly not glorious in the morning. This is the part of the game that was featured in the demo, with one major difference. Before going to beat up Ryukyu, we have to go to the trainer. Yeah, instead of Komaki, Yonashiro, and Mac, we get this new guy that no one cares about except Kiryu himself. He teaches you the Ryukyu style, and the game even states that it was Kiryu's idea to start learning this dumb shit. Because, yeah, I believe that. I can kind of understand the wish to consolidate all of the trainers into one guy, but Mac and Yonashiro were part of Yakuza 3's identity. Komaki is part of Yakuza's identity. Throwing all that away for this no-name bozo is puzzling, to say the least. The training itself isn't even that interesting. It's a collection of combat challenges with optional bonus challenges, and the only thing you get for completing these is training points. There's a grand total of 4 moves that you can unlock from the trainer, only one of which is actually useful, and you can only do that by getting enough training points to hit the threshold to take an exam, to then actually go to the next training level, at which point you unlock 1 move. We'll come back to this in just a second, but right now I've got a Ryudo captain's ass to kick. Well, I ought to change first, but now it's time to kick his ass. Quick aside, what's with this new outfit? It's not bad, but it was a wholly unnecessary change to make. Imagine if in Kiwami 2 they made Kiryu's suit black for no reason, but then they gave you the option to go to the normal gray one in Chapter 2. I see no reason to change it in the first place. On to the Ryukyu fight for real. I've already talked about most of what I needed to say for the cutscenes in the demo section. However, I haven't really touched on Mikio yet. He has the same voice actor and model from the original, which is all fine and good, but I think that the ported cutscene animation works better on him precisely because he uses his original model. If you pay attention, Mikio is noticeably more expressive than Nikia or Kiryu in this scene, and I think that goes for the rest of the game as well. To talk more at length about the fight itself, for one, the intro looks really bad. There's way too little movement going on to justify the amount of camera angles here, and once again, the lack of voice lines is quite jarring. Unlike the demo, Nikia also uses the standard boss theme. Nikia himself mostly just uses his original moveset, but he does have a couple additions. He has this tackle thing which looks really dumb, but sure, I could see him doing that. He can also pick up objects, which is a neat change that I like. You can also enter the convenience store mid-fight now, which is cool, but you can't even do the microwave heat action, so what's the point? It appears that his main gimmick is also gone. In the original, he would do the cha-cha slide towards you, which gave him a consistent tell that would open him up for damage. He doesn't do this anymore, but it's not a major deal seeing as he wasn't a super in-depth boss to begin with. I still think it's a bit early to give a complete look at the combat of the full game, but there are a few things I want to highlight here. Heat gain in this game is a noticeable improvement from Pirate Yakuza, probably helped by the phone decoration system. One major change from the demo is that bosses now resist the spin hit reaction after a few hits, making them less comboable and much harder to stun. The glitch with face-down launchers is still in the full release, and while mortal attacks are in the game, mortal reversals are not. Yep, we're back to playing Judgment. Speaking of phone decorating though, it's basically this game's version of Pirate Yakuza's ring system, which was that game's version of the equipment system from most other games. Now, I don't have a fully objective way to compare equipment systems, but the best way I could think of is with some math. I don't really feel like editing an entire section on combinatorics in my Yakuza Kiwami 3 video, so pause to read at your own discretion if you want to see my methodology. I compared Kiwami 3 to the two other most recent real-time entries, Gaiden and Pirate Yakuza, as well as OG3. Gaiden has 98 unique equipment combos, Pirate Yakuza has 927, Yakuza 3 has 1099, and Kiwami 3 has 2. Yeah, I don't think the phone customization system is implemented very well. So now we have the rest of the stuff that was in the demo, aka the Tamashiro family fight. One thing that's apparent now is how much better the lighting of the preceding cutscene is compared to just about everything else. It makes me think that they gussied up this one in particular to hide how bad the overall lighting was in the demo. As for the fight itself, now that I'm not mowing through these guys like in the demo, I can say that the crowd control in this game feels not too bad actually. It does feel a bit simplified in the sense that you have a select few options which feel like big dumb play the game for me attacks, and that DoD is kinda useless for crowd control outside of Dragon Boost. But I think one of the key things to keep in mind is that attacks in this game tend to have much higher hit stun than in Gaiden or Pirate Yakuza when enemies are not in heat mode. And since basic enemies don't have a heat mode, they are essentially susceptible to big attacks like the Surujin spin or the Triple T. If I had to describe it, it feels a bit like a Muso, which is a bit crazy because I say the exact same thing about Yakuza 6. When it comes to group fights, I think Yakuza 6 has the best offerings in the whole series. This is not only because the crowds tend to be enormous, but also because, with good positioning, your attacks can hit a dozen enemies at once due to collateral hitboxes. The groups were large, but the game gave you a wide array of options to deal with them. And it's not something that I think has been replicated by any other game in this series until kind of Kiwami 3. You may be able to count the amount of viable crowd control options on one hand, but hey, at least Kiwami 3 has something. Moving on, I kinda glossed over the cutscene that follows this fight from the demo. though now that I can see it in its proper context, I think it's worth discussing. This scene is a bit weird. The entire point of it is to show how Ryukyu initially gains his respect for Kiryu. It's not a horrible scene in concept, but I think it's placed quite oddly. In the original game, you could already infer that Ryukyu comes to respect Kiryu, especially when taking the scene where he comes to ask Kiryu for help into account. I'll elaborate more when we actually get to that scene in Chapter 3, but having to basically spell it out here is bad, both because it lessens the impact of that scene, and also because it's the first of one of this game's worst writing sins. Kiwami 3 is allergic to subtlety. It is written in a way that assumes the player is incapable of reading between the lines at all, and it's something that plagues many of these Kiwami 3 originals. This scene is far from the worst offender, and there are a couple new ones that I genuinely liked, but keep this in mind moving forward. Next on the chopping block, how do I feel about New Nakahara? His performance ranges from a clear downgrade from the original to just kind of inoffensive. You could have done a whole lot worse than this guy, and similar actor circumstances to Ryukyu may have been at play. Nakahara's voice actor, Shigeru Izamiya, is still alive, but is getting up there in age, so that may have also been a factor. However, I still just don't get the need to slap a likeness model over the old one. Nakahara's original design worked so well specifically because he was just an old guy. The sweet grandpa type. Ryo Ishibashi looked straight out of a fucking period drama about the Sengoku period. This is not only in his face and mannerisms, but also in his clothing. New Nakahara wears a robe for whatever reason, which is certainly more fitting of a patriarch, but Nakahara's original clothing did so much to tell us about his character. Mans was running around doing Yakuza business in a white tank top and sweatpants. It matched his sweet and caring personality, helped portray the Ryudo as an overall more relaxed and friendly Yakuza family compared to what we're used to, and the lack of sleeves even revealed part of his tattoo, which made his design more distinct and even foreshadowed the full reveal later in the game. I think that New Nakahara is definitely the least bad of the recasts, but still leaves much to be desired. He's perfectly serviceable in most cases, but I feel like Ishibashi's performance falls short of Izamiya's in more intense and emotionally charged scenes. The scene where you meet with Nakahara is originally where Chapter 2 ended, but Kiwami 3 elected to extend the length of this chapter with some fucking bullshit. We get hit with a wombo combo of 2 rehashed pieces of side content, one being the raffle from Ishin and the other being the photo rally from Infinite Wealth. I'm going to put as much effort into my critique of these systems as RGG did porting them into the game. Next is the forced tutorial for the biker gang. This is one of the few parts of the game that I genuinely despise. I don't have it in me to give well-constructed criticism for this, so allow me to go a little apeshit for a moment. So this whole thing starts out with Kiryu finding one of the members on the street. She says her gang got jumped by this other gang called the Tokyo Night Terrors, and Kiryu goes to help out. Whatever, this is a pretty standard way of introducing side content. So you go and help the girls out, and it turns out the leader is the daughter of Timu Komaki because we needed to justify the money we spent on the umpteenth face actor, and he makes a stupid joke about hentai, and Kiryu is now advocating for juvenile delinquency for whatever reason, despite the fact that he has young, impressionable children of his own, and he literally drops everything to go join this dumb as shit biker gang that solely exists to be a selling point, and also it's misogynistic for whatever reason. Also, we're gonna make you do the exact fucking thing we forced you to do in Pirate Yakuza, where we'll bar you from making any story progress until you capture enough Pokemon, except unlike Pirate Yakuza, where the whole point of the damn game is that you are a pirate captain with a pirate crew, this is solely for stupid side content bullshit that has nothing to do with the main storyline, but we're still gonna pause the game right here, because every good remake should obliterate the pacing of the original to the point where it feels like you just slammed into a fake tunnel at Mach 2 Wile E. Coyote style. Now that's what I call diversity. How progressive. That is a real piece of dialogue from Yakuza Kiwami 3 and Dark Ties. After this exchange, you fight some guys, and Kiryu gets officially declared the chairman of the biker gang. Don't you get it, guys? He's the chairman! This is a clever reference to the fact that Kiryu is indeed the 4th chairman of me losing my goddamn patience with this asinine bullshit. And as if not enough of your time has been wasted already, even after officially receiving the title of chairman, you're still not done. You have to sit through some more rambling in the Kamurocho underground parking lot, as if their blatant asset reuse was not already shameless. And after that, we cut to the warehouse where you fight Chainsaw Akutsu in Lost Judgment, where we get introduced to the 4 dickheads of Dojima, or whatever they're called. After you spend another 15 minutes minimum doing the same copy and pasted group fight over and over and over again to get 10 members, you're still not done. Because now you actually have to do one of the main missions for the biker gang stuff. It's a sort of base raid kind of thing, and it's not that bad, but God forbid you have to do more than one of these because they all feel the exact fucking same. Only after completing this are you finally free from the shackles of this horrifically shoehorned side mode. I did not have the drive to actually complete this. It's not worth it. Chapter 3 introduces the orphanage side mode, and it doesn't leave a good first impression. The whole setup is that Haruka is doing a ton of chores and Kiryu offers to help, but the dialogue seems like it's ripped straight out of a modern SpongeBob episode, and for some reason Kiryu keeps talking about being motivated like he's fucking Virgil. It doesn't help that the entire thing is just a pile of rehashed minigames. Kiryu helps his kids with their homework, and his definition of helping is just doing it for them. This minigame is a copy and paste of the vocational school from Yakuza 7. After that is sewing, which is new. I didn't like it very much though. The minigame itself isn't bad, it's functionally a racing game with some neat mechanics, but I get sensory overloaded super bad due to the excessive screen movement, and I find it to be more disorienting than anything. After that is the garden, which is ripped from Ishin, then cooking, which is from Pirate Yakuza, and the requests board, which is also from Ishin. The 2 main storylines for the orphanage are the cooking storyline and the individual stories for each kid. The cooking story is fine, it has some nice moments, but I didn't find it particularly mind-blowing. The individual stories, on the other hand, are a whole thing to get into. So let's look at them one by one. Ayako. This one is odd. The original Ayako segment was about her running away from morning glory, quite literally, but now it's her life's dream to do track, and it really just feels like an unnecessarily inflated trait. Also, Ayako's motivation is literally the opposite now. She ran away because she felt underappreciated, but now she's going to extreme lengths to put others before herself. Also, shocked breath. And why is Kiryu yelling at her? They're trying to make this some big emotional scene, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be any emotional weight here, but this doesn't sound like a parent talking to their child. Kiryu also pulls the whole "we can't settle this with words" shtick, which is out of left field. I don't hate the idea of still having to do a foot race with Ayako, but there's no reason for this to happen downtown anymore, and the new story removes the thematic relevance of the original. The chase itself is also the new watered-down version and has horribly ill-fitting music. Kiryu's shirt also clips into frame at one point. The final scene is basically just a rehash of the original, but it doesn't hit nearly as hard. Koji. His name is Trey, and he has a basketball game tomorrow. You basically just tell him how to lead a team good. This one is peak though, because you can specifically choose not to mention the biker gang. Izumi. This replaces the Mame story from the original. Like I said, Mame is kinda just here from the get-go now, which actually removes one of Mikio's character moments from the original. He technically still builds the doghouse in this game, but it's completely glossed over, and the complete lack of bonding time we see between him and Izumi in Kiwami 3 sullies his decision to put his life on the line to protect the doghouse later in the story. The whole plot of this story is that Mame doesn't know how to sit, so Izumi gets mad and runs away. So she gets jumped by some guys and Mame saves her. Except no he doesn't, and you have to beat some ass. This one is fine, but it definitely feels like a slapdash replacement for the original version that was part of the main story. Taichi. Invisible Mitsuo. So instead of the wrestling match that you did in the original when Taichi had his allergy attack, which was the best orphanage segment in the game, we have Taichi's unchecked hubris. I'm not gonna pretend like it's not in character, and the Rocky training segment we get is pretty fire, but you can't just remove Ricky Mask and the super flying Taichi kick. Riona. What the fuck were they thinking with this one? Kiryu goes to get Riona some makeup to help cheer her up. She follows him and she gets targeted by an actual fucking child predator. I beat this guy's ass extra hard for good measure, but after that they hug it out and the story ends. Unbelievably tone deaf. Eddie. You just go spend some time with her and then beat some guys up. That's it. Shido. Shido is so goated for this one, honestly. This one might actually be an improvement from the original. Instead of Shido getting bullied, it's about Shido protecting his friend from his dad, and I found it to not be too bad. Mitsuo. This is just a modified version of the story from the original. It removes the racist line, and it completely skips the part where Mitsuo gets rejected. It misses the original point where Riona was insecure about her burn scar and Mitsuo comes to defend her from getting bullied. I mean, it's neat, I guess, that it works out in the end, but it cuts out pretty much all of the tension. Rikia also plays no part in this version at all. In short, I think that while the orphanage is a lot more structured in this game than it was in the original, this is not how I would have wanted RGG to fix the original's issues. While the orphanage segments in the original game did have a tendency to drag and were a bit intrusive at times, they were still important parts of the game that deserved to be in the main story. They forced you to spend time with the children, which made them more memorable and made you care about their struggles that much more. Now that it has been relegated to side content and is locked behind more menial tasks, the average player might not see everything that they should. Not only does this hurt the kids, but the original orphanage segments contained important character moments for Rikia and Mikio as well. I already mentioned the part about Mikio building the doghouse for Mame, but Rikia played big roles in Mitsuo and Taichi's segments from the original, which gave him a chance for his goofier side to shine through. It's a part of his character that still exists in this game, but feels much less natural both due to Kasamatsu's inferior performance and the lesser focus on these slice-of-life moments. Scenes such as the one in the Love Hotel are still funny, but feel a bit odd for new Rikia due to the absence of setup for this part of his character. Finally, after all of that, we have some new story content. This is one of the big new scenes that RGG brought attention to in the trailers. We actually get to see Suzuki, the politician running against Tamiya. We never actually see him face to face in the original, so RGG took this opportunity to give him more of an active presence in the story. Too bad they only went halfway with it. Instead of seeing him 0 times past his introduction, we now see him 2 times. And the first one is paced like shit. The entire scene is just Kiryu going, "Grr, I don't like you," and then Suzuki going, "Hey, hi, how you doing? Get out or I'll kill you." And there's no time to let anything sit, and it barely brings anything new to the table. All this scene tells us is that Suzuki is a mean guy who wants to kick us out of the orphanage, which we already knew. Immediately after that, however, we get another new scene which I actually think is really good. It's a new scene with Tamiya, and it's actually paced really well. It's pretty small in the grand scheme of things, but seeing Tamiya personally come out to Kiryu's orphanage and even apologize for dragging him into the oncoming mess is completely in character for what we see of him later in the game. What do you know, this is actually a good Kiwami 3 original. At least until the game idiot-proofs itself once more by forcing Kiryu to state the obvious for all the iPad kids at home. We're still not done with the new scenes. This next one actually shows when Saki gets kidnapped, and my thoughts are quite mixed. The whole point of the scene is that everyone is out doing Yakuza stuff while Saki is home alone, at which point her mother comes and takes her. To start with positives, I think this scene is pretty well made for the limitations it has. Saki, of course, cannot speak at this point in the game, but the voice actor for Saki's mother also sadly passed away a few years ago, so outside of recasting her for this one scene, there's no way to have her speak here, and I think that the way this scene is shot uses the lack of dialogue to its advantage. There's one big problem with this scene, however: it never needed to exist. And in fact, I think its existence makes this entire arc just a little bit worse. The whole point of the upcoming segment where you have to find Saki is that, while you're fairly certain that Saki didn't want to go with her mother, the lack of provided context leaves room for doubt. Foster children wanting to see their birth parents isn't exactly unheard of, and it makes the eventual reveal and message about chosen family hit that much harder. Being shown that Saki did not go willingly in order to build tension has the inadvertent effect of lessening it. It doesn't help that this scene hard cuts to Rikia showing up at the orphanage, which doesn't leave any room for it to sit. I think that this scene is done far worse in the remake as well. It's one of the few times when an originally text-based cutscene gets full voice acting, and actually turns out worse for wear. The scene now features more of the extremely overbearing music that this game is known for, and the tone of the scene is also much different than what it used to be.
酒に酔って暴れる始末。母親は母親で、サキさんを放っておいて、外の男の家を転々とするような浮気女で。
I always interpreted this scene to be much more urgent, which was helped by Rikia's tone being much less somber in the original. Rikia's language as a whole in Kiwami 3 is much less crass, and that's especially apparent in this scene. Whereas original Rikia highlighted the urgency of the situation, new Rikia feels more like a flat exposition machine. And as if we didn't have enough cutscenes affecting other cutscenes, the following one, where Kiryu calls out Rikia for calling him Aniki, directly clashes with the more tactful and self-reflective personality we see from Rikia right before it. I cannot stress enough just how well the pieces fall into place when it comes to the writing of the original game, at least in parts like this one. Making small changes like these has rippling effects across the whole game. And for the Aniki scene in particular, it also doesn't help that Kiryu is now completely expressionless due to the copied animations. Moving on to the scene with drunk Nakahara, I don't think this one's too bad. It does have some more intrusive music, and once more is less effective due to us knowing that Saki was kidnapped and did not go willingly, but I think this scene is actually decently lit for a change, and Ishibashi's performance here is also pretty good. And would you look at that, it's time for the first long battle. But wait a minute, that's not where the Tamashiro office is. Well, it turns out that RGG, in their infinite wisdom and $20 budget, decided to not fully recreate downtown Ryukyu. Hatsumachi has been made significantly smaller. I don't think this is that terrible of a change, and is certainly not as bad as something like Shinseicho being completely axed in Kiwami 2, but why are you remaking a game if you clearly don't have the resources to remake all of it? And speaking of not remaking all of it, you know what else isn't here? Kamiyama. This is where you meet him in the original, and he's just gone. It makes sense considering that the weapon system was cut from this game, but I will still mourn his loss nonetheless. To actually go into the long battle now, well, for one, the entrance cutscene is much worse. Big surprise, it's way too dark, and it removes the nice detail of the distinctly colored RGBY shirts that these guys had in the original. Why change that? The long battle theme is also a horribly generic replacement song. The long battle itself is pretty fun, though. I've already stated how mowing through squadrons of basic enemies feels pretty good in this game, and the long battle has been greatly expanded to include some big groups alongside just more enemies in general. It feels much more geared towards Kiwami 3's gameplay direction. It's still nothing crazy, but neither was the original, so I'd say it does a pretty good job overall. The fight itself is nothing too crazy. It's one of the most unchanged fights from the original. It has the same pseudo-dynamic intro thing, and it looks okay. He also uses the standard boss theme like in the original. Tamashiro starts out in his knife phase and then goes into his knuckle phase like usual. His QTE has seen a small animation rework, but the thing that stands out most to me is the absolute lack of any visual effects that were present in the original, which makes it look far less interesting. A small nitpick that I have is that, in the original, the QTE would only activate after Tamashiro was in his knuckle phase for a bit. Now the QTE is the phase transition itself, meaning that Tamashiro doesn't have his knuckles 1 second and then has them the next second. The only major gameplay change I can note is that he's much easier for a new game playthrough than he was in the original, both due to the amount of grinding opportunities you're allotted, as well as you being more powerful to start with in this game. His different phases also feel much less distinct. He'd gained knockdown immunity upon going into heat mode in his knuckle phase in the original, but in return, he became far more susceptible to parries. With both of those mechanics being removed, It makes the knife and knuckle movesets feel far more homogeneous. The Tamashiro post-fight cutscene is my favorite one in the entire game, and probably the entire series. It's an extremely sweet scene that is emblematic of Yakuza 3's main theme of family, and it's one of the things I was most fearful of them ruining in the remake. So, did they? Kinda? It looks worse for one, and this is one of the scenes where the new translation really becomes noticeable to me. One area where I think this really matters is when Saki's mother is going off about how much she hates Saki. In the original, her lines have the connotation of her not willing to make sacrifices to take care of a child. She says things like, "From the moment she was born, everything was about her," and "If you want her weighing you down that badly, just fucking take her." It implies that she considers Saki a burden, and it's honestly heart-wrenching to listen to. In Kiwami 3, these lines have been changed to, "The second she was born, she took everything from me," and "If you want to drag her dead weight around that badly, fine, be my guest," respectively. These translations don't do nearly as good of a job, and imply that she kinda just doesn't like Saki for an unspecified reason. I also feel like the translation has been made far wordier in general. For example, the lines, "Well, there's your answer, Saki, she's your daughter now," have been changed to, "Doesn't leave much room for doubt, does it? I think it's safe to say she's your daughter now." That is double the words to describe the same thing. In doubling the word count, the lines also sound more passive, are less natural, and lose the short and to the point factor that is critical for emotional scenes like this. Now, I'm obviously not going to bring up each and every instance of a botched translation unless there is a particularly bad example, but do keep this in mind. One final drawback of the Kiwamification process is that I think new Nakahara just does a significantly worse job here. I've already talked about how he just doesn't look the part, which also translates to Saki's drawing, but he also sounds far less defeated here.
くそ、なんてほやほやだ。実の子の目の前で。これじゃあ先があんまりにも。くそ、なんて母親だ。実の子の目の前で。これじゃあ先があんまりにも。
This scene has definitely been downgraded from the original, but I still think it's mostly intact, and fares better than some of this game's worst sins. The following cutscene is pretty much on par with the original, thankfully. New Nakahara does a good job here, and I think the Ryudo office actually looks pretty good at nighttime. The only thing I can say is done worse is that they removed the stupid facial expression that Kiryu has when Daigo walks in, so never mind, this scene is actually a significant downgrade. There's also an addendum to this talking segment where Toma goes off about his loyalty to Okinawa. Kiwami 3 definitely tries to give Toma more of a presence in the story, and for the most part, I think they did a decent job. The only other thing of note in this scene is that new Nakahara does a much worse job at losing his shit over Kiryu being the 4th chairman.
確か堂島のりって。あんたひょっとして桐生。堂島のりって。あんたひょっとして桐生。
まあ今度から喧嘩を売るときは。
I was a bit cautious going into this part. The middle portion of Yakuza 3, starting in Chapter 4, is its weakest segment, where the vast majority of its writing and gameplay issues lie. Many chapters in this middle portion are also quite short, so I was very worried that RGG would introduce even more filler to pad the runtime. And we'll see. For now, why is it so fucking dark? This problem does not go away. If a scene takes place at nighttime, or even just has dim lighting, it will be too dark to see anything. This game's cutscene direction has many issues, but this one is by far the most prevalent. Remember how the orphanage story from the original where you found Mame got cut? This is the replacement. A 30-second text boxing sequence where Mikio just says, "Hey Kiryu, I built a doghouse for Mame." I've already stated how this removes a crucial character moment for Mikio, but they didn't even bother to try and give him anything else. Mikio already got the short end of the stick compared to Rikia when it came to screen time in the original, and that disparity is only made worse by the increased screen time that Rikia gets and the removal of many of Mikio's scenes and his exclusive sub-stories. K3 actually presents us with something new in return for cutting the orphanage stories that would normally be here. It's one of Toma's new scenes. He's delivering a speech in downtown Ryukyu, at which point he gets attacked by some thugs and you have to protect him. It's nothing mind-blowing, but I do appreciate the commitment to giving him more of a presence in the story. This is something that feels like it could have been in the original. Speaking of the cut orphanage stories, since they're not here anymore, we're headed straight to Kamurocho, which means we get the introduction scenes for Mine, Hamazaki, and Kanda. Mine's first, and his cutscene is basically just a one-to-one recreation of the original. It looks good, and the lighting's not too bad. Mine himself also looks pretty good, but he unfortunately has not renewed his contract with Gatorade. Moving on to a scene I have a lot more to say about, we gotta listen to this son of a bitch now. I'm just gonna say it up front. Even disregarding the fact that Kagawa is a straight-up sex offender, he is by far the worst of the recasts. I've seen his performance described as sounding like a chain-smoking duck, and...
中国の包丁はよく切れるな。これだったら人間の首も真っ二つだ。試してみてえな。
I couldn't agree more. It sounds legitimately awful. This is the only voice he puts on for the whole fucking game. Not only is he a shitty person, but he sounds like shit too, and completely misses what made the original Hamazaki's performance work. Original Hamazaki was menacing, but effortlessly so. This fucker is trying way too hard to come off as intimidating, and it just doesn't work. Now, the original voice actor for Hamazaki is also not a great person, considering he married a 16-year-old when he was 40, so I'm not suggesting we get him back, but are you telling me that literally no one else was able to fill this role? Kagawa is one of the worst casting choices that RGG has ever made, even if you disregard his conduct. Last up is Kanda, and like Mine, his cutscene hasn't changed that much. The lighting is worse, of course. Other than that, the most I can say is that Kanda's slaps have way less of an impact. Apart from those cutscenes, the only other thing of note in Chapter 4 is the fight with Hasebe. As a whole, I think that the Hasebe fight is pretty similar to how it plays in the original. Yuya now uses the Riki Mask moveset, and Kazuki is Rush Shibusawa for whatever reason, and both of them appear to be far more aggressive as well. Hasebe fights very similarly to his original version, with the exception of him no longer reverting to his unarmed phase near the end of the fight. Additionally, we have another fight gimmick casualty. In Yakuza 3, Hasebe would lose his ability to block after certain attacks in his sword phase, which allowed you to easily combo him if you knew what you were doing. That is sadly no longer the case. The Independence for Violence remix is... confusing? Chapter 5 is another one that really only had a couple of things in it in the original. In order to pad the runtime, however, RGG has decided to add intermediate fights while you're on your way to fight Richardson. These fights are not bad in a vacuum, but they remove any and all suspense from the actual Richardson fight. Why should I be surprised at Kiryu getting jumped when he's already been jumped multiple times? And for said Richardson fight, this is the first boss I consider to be significantly downgraded. To start with small stuff, why is he blue? Richardson's heat aura was yellow in the original, although that only applied to his final fight. The yellow was a good contrast to his black clothes, and this seems like a rather meaningless change. Additionally, the arena has been expanded. You can now go out into the street, perhaps to accommodate the fact that the Kiwami version has more ads. This doesn't make sense though, considering that the whole point of the fight is that they're jumping him in an alleyway so that no one sees him. Here's where you insert the obligatory "it looks worse because of the blue filter" comment. But you know what else is worse? Well, we've gone from FM Soundstorm to FM Shartstorm. Speaking of sounds, all of Richardson's in-battle voice lines are gone. This is especially bad for his third fight, but even in this one, he no longer says his iconic whenever he gets up. In my opinion, they also made Richardson significantly worse gameplay-wise. Richardson's gimmick in OG3 was that he was always aggressive all the time. This man was always either attacking you or running at you so that he could attack you. You'd think that, combined with his extremely fast attacks, this would make for an incredibly tough and overwhelming boss, but it actually has the opposite effect. It makes him very predictable and allows you to dodge his attacks for an opening. So what would happen if you made him far less aggressive, but kept the unreactable attacks? You get an extremely annoying boss with no consistent pattern to exploit, who attacks way faster than you. You basically have to play defense until you aura break him. Now, Kiwami 3 does give you plenty of armor and other ways to open him up, but the boss design is still greatly worsened. The following cutscene of the Tojo clan meeting is mostly intact, apart from the elephant, though I do mourn the loss of one of my favorite Kanda lines from the original. In contrast, Kashiwagi's quote-unquote death cutscene has actually seen a major change. Kiryu's lines have been re-recorded to be noticeably more distraught, which actually fixes one of my biggest problems with the original scene.
Kashiwagi-san! 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 Kashiwagi-san!
The original line delivery was not exactly what you'd expect someone to sound like after their pretty much uncle got Swiss cheesed by a minigun. I also think that this is the one scene that actually gets away with being this dark, and at the very least, there is just enough lighting on Kiryu and Kashiwagi to be able to actually see what's happening. I definitely think that this is one of the few scenes that was done better in Kiwami 3. Moving into Chapter 6, we're on the move. Kiryu is, at least. The original chase segment here has been replaced by a Judgment-style chase, which the series has insisted upon using for any and all chase segments since Judgment. Problem: they're extremely boring. Kiryu moves for you, and the only interaction you have is a handful of QTEs spread throughout. I understand that the Yakuza 3-style chase segments could be a bit brutal, but they were a lot more interactive and a lot more fun. It doesn't help that the chase music is significantly worse, and the new chase is now interspersed with Kiryu's extremely corny monologuing. At the very least, once you meet up with Date, the trek across Kamurocho that you had to do in the original is gone, which is something I'm actually grateful they cut out. And speaking of good things to cut out, the Chapter 6 plot dump has been drastically shortened. All of the character profiles are condensed down into one cutscene instead of one per character, which helps the pacing considerably. To counteract any of the pacing improvements though, if you've avoided doing the biker gang at all costs, it's time to pay your dues, as the game forces you to do one of the missions here. Thankfully, I had already done it during my training grind, but I assume others won't be as fortunate. And as if we're flipping back and forth between good and bad changes, one of the more annoying parts of the original game was right here, where you had to go on a wild goose chase across Kamurocho to find Rikia. It took way too long and worsened what was already a horribly paced chapter. In Kiwami 3, he just tells you to come find him in Children's Park, cutting out all of the bullshit. What you see when you arrive, however... the Emperor of Handsiness himself is back putting on the only voice he knows how to do, apparently. He sounds absolutely disgusting, yet horribly generic at the same time. And this cutscene only highlights his absolute lack of range in his performance. Another thing that wasn't super apparent in his last cutscene is just how short this guy is. Now, I'm not in the business of making fun of people for their height, but this is actually more of an issue than you may realize. According to the Yakuza 3 Coliseum, Rikia is 5'10". If we assume that old Rikia and new Rikia are the same height, then this guy looks to be about 5'7" or 5'8". Problem: Hamazaki is 6'4". Hamazaki is a huge guy, which is important because it makes him more imposing. Imposing is exactly what Hamazaki is supposed to be. I am not imposed by a guy who gets towered over by this goober. Character design matters for a visual medium like a video game, which is why slapping a real person into a pre-existing role doesn't always work. And that doesn't just go for Hamazaki, though he is the worst offender, in more ways than one. The issues with this scene go beyond just Hamazaki. This is yet another Kiwami 3 original, and in true Kiwami 3 fashion, it's an idiot-proofing measure. It's a far more contrived way for Kiryu and Rikiya to learn where Kanda is, for one. In the original, you had to beat the info out of some Nishikiyama thugs, while here, Hamazaki just tells you outright. But on top of that, the scene blatantly tells you that Kamurocho is a dangerous place for Rikiya, and that he is far too in over his own head. If you have a brain, this is something that you can ascertain for yourself by the fact that A. Kiryu warns Rikiya not to come to Kamurocho, and B. when he does come to Kamurocho, shit gets bad. At best, this is RGG writes worst foreshadowing ever, asked to leave Sega, and at worst, it is the aforementioned idiot-proofing such that a literal 5-year-old can understand what's going on. And as if all of this wasn't bad enough, I've had the brightness increased this entire time. This is what the scene looks like normally. Moving to the Love Hotel scene, and I gotta say, Kasamatsu didn't do nearly as bad of a job as I was expecting for this. It's still worse than original Rikiya, and you can tell that he's kind of out of his element here, but he doesn't do terrible in all honesty. What is done terribly is basically everything else to do with this segment. One of Kanda's best lines from the original is now gone. Instead of screaming, "They're gonna skin me alive," he now says the far more generic, "Wake up boys, we've got company." Second problem. I mean, just look at it. Third problem. They missed the point of this long battle so fucking badly. The whole idea of the original long battle was that you were listening into different rooms to find which one Kanda was in, and if you picked the wrong one, you either got ambushed by some of his goons, or walked in on a couple, since, you know, this is a love hotel. I went and picked all of the wrong doors to see if they changed anything, and you can guess how disappointed I was when the first wrong door I picked showed me a fucking sumo wrestler. In fact, of all of the wrong doors, only one of them has a normal couple. Apparently, RGG is no longer confident in the inherent humor of Kiryu busting down the door of a random couple just trying to enjoy a night together, only to walk away like he doesn't give a shit. Instead, they have resorted to jingling keys in front of their audience. Keys suspiciously shaped like a sumo, or a dominatrix, or Kiryu gooning. Onto the Kanda fight, which I think is actually quite interesting. His intro makes him look like he's about to take a shit. It's pretty awful, honestly. Spoiler alert, he's got a full-on dynamic intro in Dark Ties, which looks much better. Kanda also has his own boss theme now. The fight itself is, sadly, yet another victim of boss homogenization. While Kanda is far from the best designed boss in Yakuza 3, he certainly is one of the most unique. He's very hard to open up in most situations, but becomes easily exploitable when, for example, he starts swinging furniture at you, something that he never did to me in the Kiwami 3 version. I've heard that he can, it has just become extremely rare for whatever reason. The other big gimmick of the original is the stone phase. This phase does still exist, but it has been made stupidly easy to deal with. I hit Kanda like 4 times and the stone broke. I should mention that while I did do my playthrough on Standard, I somehow ended up doing this fight on Beginner. I don't remember swapping to it, and I also don't feel like going back and doing it on Standard, so my experience may not be fully indicative of what the boss is like. What doesn't change with difficulty, however, is the QTE, which is missing the visual and sound effects from the original, making it feel less impactful. Kanda is a downgrade for sure, but it's still fine. I don't have anything in particular to say about the post-fight cutscene, but I think it does highlight one of Kasamatsu's strengths when it comes to this role. I think he actually does a great job of playing more serious scenes such as this one, where Nikia begs Kiryu to let him stay in Kamurocho to find Nakahara's assailant. In scenarios like this, he really does do a good job, which is why I can't say I fully hate him as a recast. Speaking of serious scenes, Kiwami 3 now includes one where Kiryu has time to reflect about Kashiwagi's death. I believe this was actually in the original as part of a sub-story, but a scene like this was gravely needed in the main story. That said, it is kind of retroactively lessened considering that Kashiwagi isn't actually dead. Next up, what was once a sub-story about Nikia getting Utabori to finish his tattoo is now part of the main plot. Sort of. It has been drastically changed from the original. Drastically changed to be far worse. In the original, Nikia loudly protested Utabori's refusal to finish his tattoo. This hot-headedness was an important part of his character, and it's not until Nikia uses that fire for good that Utabori comes to understand him and agrees to finish the tattoo. Now, when Utabori refuses, he just quietly accepts it. You go and beat some guys up, Nikia monologues for a bit, and then Utabori just magically decides that he wants to finish the tattoo now. I truly do not understand what the thought process behind this was, and it ruins what was once a pivotal character moment for Nikia. At least the ending is pretty nice. Wow, I don't think I can show this on YouTube. This is a new scene that caught me so off guard when I first got to it. But it's a scene of Kanda assaulting another woman in his office and getting so furious that he strangles her to death in the process. Upon which we get a shot of the corpse, albeit obscured by darkness. Now, I've played my fair share of games that show some pretty fucked up things, but the reason that this shocked me so much is that this is so far beyond anything that has been in a Yakuza game. When it comes to gore, Yakuza will never usually show anything beyond a gunshot or stab wound, or maybe someone getting beat up really badly. If someone ever has something more extreme done to them, it's usually implied rather than explicitly shown. Think Ogita getting his arm crushed, or hell, even Kanda getting decapitated later in this very game. Showing the bruised, lifeless body of an innocent woman is not something that Yakuza has ever done, and ever really needed to do. Had the corpse been implied, once again, just like how Kanda's head is later in the game, the scene would have been just as effective. It adds nothing but disgust and shock value, and is inharmonious with how the rest of the series handles things like this. It sucks because, contrary to how most people feel about it, I do genuinely respect the balls on RGG for making a scene like this. It really hammers in just how uniquely depraved Kanda is compared to other Yakuza villains. They almost had something really good here, but sometimes it is just that one thing that ruins it. Onto a less touchy subject, Hasebe is back. They gave him a second fight in this game. Do I have anything new to say about it? Not really. Do I appreciate it nonetheless? Absolutely. The beginning of Chapter 7 sees Kiryu going toe-to-toe with the Nishikiyama family, which leads to a pretty big fight in Theater Alley, then an even bigger fight in Theater Square, and then a rematch against Kanda. This is my favorite boss fight in the whole game, and it honestly feels like something that could have been in the original Yakuza 3. Kanda still does this dumbass squat in the beginning, and the fight starts out as a normal 1v1, but once you chip away about half a health bar, Kanda summons a whole squadron of adds. This sounds like it would be pretty bad, but for one, I already said that I think group combat is not bad in this game, and on top of that, this fight has a unique gimmick that works perfectly with the summons. Kanda copies tiger puppetry from Saejima, which is a bit odd, but it definitely feels like something he would do. He does this against his own goons, which is not only in character for him, but this attack has friendly fire enabled. And considering how huge tiger puppetry is, it will clear out a good few of the adds for you. The animation is also long enough that you can stay away and pick off some of the outliers while Kanda is busy. Once the adds are gone, you can go back to beating up Kanda, but he will do this group summon a few more times. I don't mind it though. It creates a very satisfying back and forth that doesn't exist basically anywhere else in the game. The only negative I can think of is that this is the first boss where the health scaling started to get a bit excessive. For context, Kiwami 3 takes the Yakuza 6 route of having a fixed number of health bars, this time being 2 instead of 1 like in that game, although the health bars become denser as you move on in the game. However, the scaling in Kiwami 3 is far steeper than in Yakuza 6. This is to incentivize buying attack upgrades, but I purposefully chose not to. I generally try to avoid buying attack upgrades in Yakuza games, and I wanted to try and see how that would work in this one as well. And we'll see how that goes as we move on. The scaling for this fight wasn't too bad though, and I actually enjoyed this fight being on the longer side. That said though, during my winning attempt, Kanda just did like a third of a health bar to himself. I wasn't even looking, so I have no idea what even happened. I think Brute Instinct, Kanda's new theme, works much better on this fight as well. What's even better is the post-fight cutscene where Kiryu rips into Kanda for dragging Nishiki's name through the mud, which is extremely cathartic and doesn't overstay its welcome. Back to what was originally in Chapter 7, we head over to Purgatory to check in on Majima. Something doesn't feel right here though. Maybe it's the fact that I can't see anything! Did you know that this scene used to take place at sunset? Unfortunately, sunset doesn't exist in Kamurocho, so we have to settle for a fucking black hole. The walk through Purgatory has been cut. It removes some of the suspense, but it's kind of a whatever change. What is far from a whatever change is how they fucking obliterated the second Majima fight in this game. The intro looks like ass and is one of the worst ones in the game. They have 7 different camera angles on Majima like he's doing a fucking Vogue shoot, and it looks so cheap. And for the fight itself, it's awful. It starts out fine and reuses the QTE from the original, which actually looks decent, but everything goes to shit from there. It's one thing to remove the unique mechanic of being able to bait attacks if you have your back turned, but the new Shadow Clone phase is horrible. You can't get rid of them until they all do their super attack unless you can land a heat action on Majima himself, but good fucking luck considering that Majima is almost impossible to hit in this phase. Either way, Majima spams these clones constantly, so there's a decent chance that he'll just immediately pop them again. Don't even think about trying to attack him once he goes into his super dodgy mode. You just have to wait it out while the clones do 1 billion damage to you because it's kinda hard to dodge attacks from 3 Majimas at once. I had to rely on stuns to even attempt to get any damage in, because they stop him from summoning his clones. Rinse and repeat ad nauseum until you finally beat him. What was once my favorite Majima fight in the series has turned into my least favorite by a country mile. What the hell were they thinking? Chapter 8 is pretty much one-to-one with the original. This is also where the Coliseum is introduced in both versions. The Kiwami 3 Coliseum is its worst showing to date. There are a total of 9 tournaments, each with a set fight roster. Almost none of the tournaments have any unique gimmicks like in the original either. To top it all off, I can't even play it. Each tournament is under a time limit, and since I refused to buy damage upgrades, I could not get far at all. The health scaling on the very first tournament was so bad that I barely beat it with just 16 seconds to spare, so there's no way to progress beyond the bronze ranks without any attack upgrades. This poses a bit of a problem as finishing the Coliseum is the sole requirement to unlock the Amon fight in this game, which I'll get to later. Other notable omissions are the All-Star Tournament and All-Star Tag Tournaments, which were fun side modes from the original. Moving on, the only notable changes before the long battle are that a new segment of the Snake Flower March cutscene has been added, which doesn't really add anything and also has a holdover frame, as well as the fact that the construction area is just gone. Admittedly, there's nothing to really do there, and it was kinda odd to have to walk through it every time you wanted to go in or out of Purgatory, but it will be missed nonetheless. As for the Snake Flower long battle, the original version was easily the worst long battle in the game, and one of the worst ones in the series, and I'm glad to say that the Kiwamification process treated it favorably. One of the big things about the original long battle is this one segment where you must beat up a boss halfway while ads respawn infinitely. It is extremely annoying to deal with an infinite amount of enemies while having to handle a boss, especially since all of these guys use the Kung Fu moveset, which is very tough to handle in groups. This encounter still exists in the remake, but the infinite spawns have been removed. That said, the long battle has been made shorter, and there's only one officer fight instead of 2. The chase segment has been removed, which is fine because Kiwami 3 chases suck anyway. The officer fight has this new dynamic sequence, which is functionally kind of a dynamic intro, and it's honestly cool as fuck. I think the long battle as a whole has been made less annoying, although a good bit of content was sacrificed in the process. After making it to Lau Ka Long, the first thought that came to my mind, other than wow this cutscene looks like ass, was, does Lau Ka Long sound different? I wasn't hearing things here. Every single non-recast character simply reuses their voice lines from the original, with the exception of Kiryu in a handful of scenes, and Lau Ka Long.
さあ、決着をつけよう。桐生一馬。
さあ、決着をつけよう。桐生一馬。
The reason I believe this was done is simply due to voice actor conflicts. Lau Ka Long has actually had 3 different voice actors across the series. In OG1 and OG3, he is voiced by Shinichi Takizawa, in Yakuza Kiwami, he is voiced by Ryuta Morikawa, and finally, in RGG Online, Yakuza 7, Infinite Wealth, and now Kiwami 3, he is voiced by Hiroki Goto. I assume that they wanted to align his Kiwami 3 voice actor with the actor who's played him for the past 8 years or so, and they updated his voice lines accordingly. I think that Takizawa's original performance sounds more distinct, but Goto does not do a bad job by any means. And even if he did, that wouldn't really be a Kiwami 3 issue. Lau's intro is passable, I guess, but it's one where the lack of voice lines is a glaring problem. One of Lau's gimmicks actually did make a return here. He will block frequently in his spear phase and will throw out a retaliation attack whenever you hit his block. In the original game, this attack gave him super armor, and you never really wanted him to do this, but his tendency to block was balanced out by his increased vulnerability to grabs. This part is not the case anymore, though he no longer has armor during the retaliation attack, and your increased mobility makes it easier to punish. After a silent phase transition, you go to his unarmed phase, which has been made way harder. This man has no chill, and there is a non-zero chance of you getting obliterated off of one stray hit. He is also as fast as you, so he can outmaneuver you. After another silent transition, you get to the claw phase. The claw phase was far and away the worst one in the original, as Lau became extremely passive and gained knockdown immunity, alongside his claws making him immune to things like parries. The best strategy for the OG claw phase is to hold down heavy attack and pray that Lotus Flare Fist lands. He is much more aggressive in Kiwami 3, which makes him a lot easier to bait and punish, which is also helped by his hitboxes being much more reined in. Partway through the claw phase, the QTE activates, and this one is actually a bit infamous. In the original QTE, the camera jump cuts to a shot of Lau's foot to show knives emerging from his shoes. In the Kiwami version, he doesn't activate his knife shoe, which is already odd enough, but they didn't bother to remove the shot of his foot, meaning that the game just quick cuts to a shot of Bro's J's for no reason at all. I think I can say that this fight is an improvement overall. The spear phase was streamlined a bit to remove some minor annoyances, while the unarmed phase is definitely a bit worse due to the difficulty spike, though not by a huge margin, and the overhauled claw phase is definitely something that this fight needed. Oh, and the Ogre Has Returned remix is pretty good too. Beautiful eyes. I wish I could see anything with them. This post-fight cutscene doesn't have anything new about it other than the darkness problem, though one odd change is the fact that they changed where Lau gets shot. It doesn't really affect anything, but it's another instance of a lack of attention to detail. Chapter 9 starts with the scene of Menace showing up in Purgatory with Kanda's head. This scene is another unfortunate victim of a bad translation seeping into the Japanese dub, and maybe the worst one at that. It would be far too much to get into every little issue with the translation in this scene, but it has everything wrong with it. Excessive wordiness in multiple instances, introduction of swears that weren't previously there, changed lines that no longer even mean the same thing, and overall just less punchiness in the dialogue. Here's that scene from the trailers, and I'm not gonna lie, it's actually a pretty good addition. Ignoring the elephant in the room, the cutscene is a nice way to actually include what happens to Hamazaki after Lau gets shot, and starts to show his facade slipping as he realizes just how fucked he is. It provides a more natural build-up to what we see happen to Hamazaki at the end of 3 and in 4. Kagawa actually does a decent job of acting here. That is all of the praise that I will be giving him. Before getting into the infamous plot dump, I guess RGG decided to pad out this chapter a little bit more, so we actually get to fight with some Snake Flower officers. The fight itself is nothing to write home about, but it uses Ogre Has Returned, despite, the Ogre not returning. Moving on to the diet building, look, people have already ripped into this shot to no end. It looks like ass, and you don't need me to tell you. And for the plot dump proper, they kinda ruined it. Don't get me wrong, they made it better, but in doing so, they ruined it. Tamiya now offers to stop and take a break literally every 30 seconds, which way overcompensates for the complaints surrounding the original version. I think it's a good call to rearrange the dialogue a bit to streamline what is otherwise a 30-minute long collection of cutscenes, but the original version already had set breakpoints. If you needed to get up and take a piss or something, you could just wait on the choice menu. I guess the new breaks allow you to save and quit if you want to stop playing partway through, but if you do plan to go through it in one sitting, then Tamiya's constant insistence on taking breaks kills the pacing, and, arguably worse, makes this segment way less funny. It's not like they even give you anything to do during the breaks anyway. The Circle of Doom has received a huge overhaul, which it desperately needed. This was easily the worst designed fight in the entire game, and I'm not gonna pretend like it was fixed completely, but it has seen some improvement. Kiwami 3 having more crowd control options helps it out already, but the removal of all of the annoying taser enemies is also a big plus. In return, we get new riot shield enemies, which are equally as annoying but in different ways. They're extremely defensive, as you could probably tell, but they are also completely immune to heat actions and can put you in 15 years of hit stun. It also doesn't help that the guys on the edge of the circle can still push you around too. Normally this is where Chapter 9 would end, but Kiwami 3 provides a couple new cutscenes to round things out. First is another cutscene with Hamazaki where it just shows how fucked he is again. It's neat, but it does seem to be placed a bit weirdly. It kinda just appears here, and I feel like it could have been slotted in more naturally somewhere else. Perhaps in the ending when Hamazaki is going off on Kiryu about how his life is ruined. I guess the scene directly after it references Hamazaki's potential death, but this scene with Suzuki and Mine is not all too substantial itself. This is the only other scene that Suzuki has in the game, and it does basically nothing to make him any more interesting of a character than he was in the original. In fact, I think I actually prefer him being an unseen background villain compared to this half-assed mastermind they turned him into in this version. I get wanting to give him more of an active role considering he is actually quite important to the plot of Yakuza 3, but why bother giving him more screen time if you won't go all the way with it? The only other thing that this scene really provides is some additional foreshadowing for Mine's upcoming actions, which the Purgatory scene already did well enough. Well, speaking of Mine, they completely refused to redo his flashback scene, which now contrasts visually with the entire game. Great job, RGG. Nothing of real importance happens in this chapter until you have to go and fight Joji, mostly because the orphanage segments got cut out. That leaves this chapter pretty bare as a whole, so yeah, we really only have the Joji fight to talk about here. I found it to be- wait, Kiryu, what are you doing? Kiryu, have some class, goddamn. Due to some kind of conflict with the clothing system in this game, Kiryu wears whatever clothing you have him set to wear in Okinawa, which for me is his OG3 Okinawa outfit. In the original game, Kiryu wears his gray suit to come fight Joji. Not only does it not make him stick out like a sore thumb, but it is thematically relevant. Let's address the elephant in the room. I am the single most biased person when it comes to Joji Kazama. He is my favorite boss fight in the whole series, and one of my favorite characters in the series. On top of that, Lyricism Without Tears is my favorite song in the whole series. If Joji Kazama has 0 fans, I am no longer of this earth. And as the #1 Joji fan in existence, I have a little too much to say about this guy for a video on the entirety of Yakuza 3, which is already excessively long as is. I do plan to make a video about this guy eventually, but for now, I'm not able to fully explain my thought process on certain things, so just bear with me here. After changing into the correct clothing, I have to say that this is maybe the one scene in the whole game that is actually lit really well. I especially love this one shot of Joji basked in the glow of one of the club lights. Pause if you want to read a mini analysis. First impressions for the fight are pretty terrible. Joji has the worst intro in the game. He just sits there and undulates? Let's not forget the Lyricism Without Tears remix either. I posted a video of my first time listening to the song when it leaked a few days before the game came out, and while I think my opinion has changed a bit since then, I still think that Mariachi Manuel hijacking the song for a good 30 seconds is completely indefensible and ruins the flow of what was originally a perfect 10 out of 10 boss theme. Joji has seen quite a few gameplay changes as well. His aura has been changed from a fiery orange to an emerald green. It's not the end of the world, but I question why it needed to be changed to begin with. Joji is unfortunately another gimmick casualty. He was a stance-based boss in the original. When out of heat mode, he played very passively and had very unpredictable openings, though there were a few ways to create openings if you knew what you were doing. In heat mode, he became extremely aggressive, at which point you need to learn the parry timings on his attacks while also not falling for his fakeouts. Now in Kiwami 3, he is always aggressive all the time. He also has a parry stance in both versions, which is yet another victim of the removal of in-battle voice lines. While you could grab him out of this stance in the original when he's not in heat mode, you had to respect this stance as he will auto-counter any attacks you throw at him. Kiwami 3 has made this parry stance laughably exploitable. Joji now parries and counterattacks as two separate actions. You can literally just dodge or perfect guard this counter without any worry. You can also just grab him out of it whenever you feel like it. And to top it all off, Dragon Boost completely ignores it. That's actually a good thing though, as it makes Joji the only boss in the game that you can actually do combos on, because he'll just sit there and do nothing. This has the unintended effect of making him the best 1v1 boss in the game, and a close second to Conda 2. Still nowhere near as good as the original though. They also completely botched his QTE. All of the slowdown has been removed, which makes the animation look super janky and disorienting. Also, the second QTE, where you normally get some damage in, now uses the fail animation no matter what, so you don't even get a hit in mid-QTE. This fight also ended up taking me 7 minutes due to the damage scaling. I didn't find it too bad since you can actually combo this guy, and I wouldn't call 7 minutes too absurd for a late game boss, but this is still getting a bit excessive. Additionally, we get another translation casualty. The original line, "Fighting's a young man's game," is now the far worse, "Seems I've grown far too old for tussling." Really? Fucking tussling? It's not the only odd translation bit here, but that'll be something else to say for the Joji video. I've seen other people bring up the fact that Kiryu now just uses his Yakuza 6 Onomichi outfit in this cutscene, while the original cutscene just has him take his jacket off. This makes no sense because Kiryu has a watch in Yakuza 6, which is still present in this scene, despite him not having a watch in any other part of the game. For some reason, while I actually think the cutscene lighting inside of the strip club looks really good, the gameplay lighting on the other hand, what is this? The following scene at Morning Glory doesn't fare too well either. It already suffers from the Breaking Bad filter, but it also contains some odd translation changes, and New Nakahara does a surprisingly bad job with this scene. Another noted fuck-up within the community is how Kiryu looks far less angry at his orphanage getting fucking bulldozed due to the animation porting. I hope by now it's very clear how this game messes up in so many different ways, but I still find it baffling how this 3-minute segment serves as a microcosm of all of them. In such a short time, we get lazy asset reuse, unfinished lighting, an overbearing filter, shitty localization, a bad recast performance, and a terrible animation port. And that doesn't even account for the many gameplay issues present in this game. But somehow, in the same breath, we go from a scene so emblematic of all of these issues to one that seemingly avoids all of the pitfalls plaguing Kiwami 3's cutscenes. The following scene with Mikio is actually lit quite well, and new Rikia delivers a good performance. I'd even say that second part applies to when Rikia pleads with Kiryu to let him help save Nakahara. I really want to emphasize that I don't think Kasamatsu is a bad actor or gives a particularly awful performance. The main issue is that the acting simply does not fit Rikia as a character in most cases. But when it comes time for Rikia to be more serious, I think that Kasamatsu's offering fits a lot better. It's a real shame. If he played, say, an original character in a different Yakuza game, I'd probably like him a lot more. And in that sense, he too is a victim of Kiwami 3. Kiwami 3 adds a new short scene of a ton of side content characters coming to help rebuild Morning Glory. It was never really explained in the original how exactly Morning Glory got rebuilt in such a short amount of time, so this not only patches up that plot hole, but it also helps reinforce the idea of Okinawa being a tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone. A scene like this didn't need to be added, but of all the unnecessary additions in this game, I am perfectly okay with this one. The bull ring scene is, unfortunately, another one to be smited by the Kiwami god. Kiwami-sama, if you will. It's more of the same, really. It's too dark. A super memorable line from the original has been changed to be far worse, and new Nakahara's performance doesn't hit nearly as hard for this scene.
久々に思い出したぜ。街で暴れ回った頃の自分をよ。玉城、久々に思い出したぜ。街で暴れ回ってた頃の自分をよ。
A unique problem with this scene is the fact that they didn't bother to upscale Nakahara's tattoo, making the texture noticeably lower quality than the other ones. Thankfully, since this fight takes place in Okinawa, we don't have to deal with the garish blue filter. But in return, the Tamashiro family fight is just as dark and ugly as the preceding cutscene. By this point, the health scaling was so bad that even basic enemies started to be a slog to get through. Heat action started doing about a quarter of a goon health bar, and it took me 4 minutes just to get to Tamashiro. The transition between the Tamashiro family and Tamashiro himself is also changed for the worse, but it also features something that should have been changed, but wasn't. To start, the mashing QTE has been changed to a simple button press. I don't mind this one. Mashing QTEs can be very immersive, but sometimes the degree and longevity of the mash can be excessive, and this is also a good change in terms of accessibility. This QTE has also had its slowdown removed, making it look significantly worse. The thing I may be most mad about, though, is what they didn't change. In the original, upon getting to the Tamashiro fight, the music changes from the awesome and iconic Pure Malice to the much less interesting More Huge. I was really hoping they'd change this in the remake, but they didn't. That's already infuriating enough, but it's made even worse by the fact that More Huge is okay, while Fatal Damage is just bad. At least the intro for the Tamashiro fight is actually a fully animated part of the transition with actual movement, instead of a glorified idle animation. Tamashiro 2 is easily the worst fight in the original game. Gun Boss plus Relentless Ads is never a good combination in Yakuza, but Kiwami 3 makes some good changes that vastly improve things. Being more mobile and having more anti-gun options in general helps out a lot, but Tamashiro is also far less aggressive when the basics spawn in, which gives you time to actually take care of them without having to worry about the threat of Tamashiro constantly trying to cross-map you. Though unlike the original, you do have to beat all of the ads before the fight can end. This fight ended up not being too bad actually. Tamashito's health scaling wasn't too extreme since he is technically a group boss, so it didn't drag too hard. I guess RGG actually did a pretty good job on this one. But to counteract any goodwill that I have for this game, it decides to take a fat, steaming shit on one of the most memorable scenes from the original. Rikia's death scene has been completely butchered. Not only does the complete lack of a night sky and reused animation absolutely obliterate the presentation of the scene, and not only did they decide to re-record Kiryu's lines for some reason only for Kuroda to give a worse performance, but they removed one of the most striking and poignant additions to the original. The original cutscene was scored by a string arrangement of Fly, which is Mine's theme, of course, but also somewhat serves as a main theme for the whole game. The inclusion of a completely new arrangement for this one scene only made it more impactful, and it has been completely removed in favor of a nondescript piano track because the main theme of Kiwami 3 is some random bullshit that doesn't even play a single time in the entire game until the credits. Imagine if you were playing Metal Gear Solid 3 and the opening scene was removed, the latter segment plays Not Snake Eater, and the only time you actually hear Snake Eater is in the ending credits, and Wait to Fall is nowhere to be found. I don't dislike the new score by any means, but you can't just replace the single most iconic cutscene score in the game because you just feel like it. Of all of the bad choices that Kiwami 3 makes in an attempt to modernize Yakuza 3, this one is the most symbolic of how much it completely misunderstands what made the original game work. I don't know what kind of fuck-up could have made this possible, but one of Mine's underlings says that Daigo got a bullet in his chest when he was very clearly shot in the gut. Most of the stuff before the Todo Hospital long battle plays out as normal, though you don't meet up with Rick Langley anymore, which makes this the worst video game of all time. I guess he still emails you at least. Before getting into the finale, I actually decided to go and finish up the Reapers by fighting Odyssey. The fight is still on top of the Millennium Tower, but I've already gone over how much worse it looks in this game. The entire storyline of the Reapers is gone, so there's really no explanation for why Odyssey shows up here. Odyssey is clearly meant to be a post-game boss. My health was almost completely gone after a mere 3 hits, and my winning attempt with no attack upgrades took a grueling 11 minutes. The fight itself is not super interesting since it's just Richardson. They also just reuse his Kiwami theme, though I'm not too mad about that considering how iconic it is. The Reapers overall are such an afterthought in this game, and that definitely extends to how unceremonious the Odyssey fight feels. It's hard, yeah, but once you're done with it, it just feels like another box that's ticked instead of the culmination of a side story. Back to the culmination of the main story though, and to be brutally honest, they fucked up this long battle, and really, the entire finale, so badly. It's been so viciously mangled to the point where I'm not even mad at it. I'm more so in awe at how RGG managed to make a game this poorly and still sell it at full price. It's so bad that it has gone beyond an unnecessary remake that was made with a shoestring budget in less than a year. The finale of Yakuza Kiwami 3 is a fascinating case study in minimalism. It is a test to see how much stuff in a supposed remake of a video game can either be removed or left clearly unfinished before it stops counting as a remake. Too long have we pondered how many parts can be replaced before the ship of Theseus is no longer that of Theseus. Kiwami 3 challenges us with defining how many parts can be removed before it is no longer that of a ship. What do you know, the intro cutscene is way too dark. Big surprise. What is actually kind of a surprise though is the removal of the second Circle of Doom from this long battle. It was significantly better than the one in Chapter 9 and actually felt fun and unique in the original, but it is now completely gone despite the first circle still being in the game, and it is replaced with a giant, nondescript group of enemies. On the topic of removal, one of the most iconic songs from Yakuza 3, Clay Doll in the Cradle, which played over this very long battle, is gone, and it has been replaced by an instrumental version of Ikizama, the obligatory song we got the vocalist for Kiwami 3. I don't think the song sounds bad, but I don't really get it as the semi-official theme of the game. And more importantly, it does not fit the tone of this long battle. What was once an absolutely legendary long battle theme has been replaced by a song you'd expect to find in a YouTube barbecue ribs recipe. There's a short transition animation after beating the initial group, which lacks any kind of impact, and then you're free to move through the rest of the long battle. What's left of it, at least. The lockers that you could destroy for healing items? Gone. Couch guys? Gone. Grenade guys? Gone. Literally an entire floor of the hospital? Gone. The removal of one of the aforementioned couch and grenade guys, as well as one of the hammer guys, completely gets rid of the enemy variety that was present in the original. Instead of having to adapt to the different enemy types that were thrown at you, I hope you enjoy beating up basic enemies after a solid 5 minutes of doing nothing but beating up basic enemies. Like I said, you only go up one floor instead of two, because yes, I want my remake to give me less of what was in the original game. The Hakuho Captain mini-boss has also technically kind of been removed. There is still a mini-boss where he used to be, but not only is he generically named instead of being specifically denoted as the Hakuho Captain, but he now uses a sword instead of knuckles and also just looks far more generic. The following hallway that normally had grenade and couch enemies is now just a big group of gun enemies. The one after that also loses its grenade enemies and the side rooms that house them, and after a single fight in the elevator, you are already at Richardson 2. Yeah, the Toto Hospital is a shell of its former self, but technically they added a new segment after Richardson, which we'll get to in a bit, so sure, I guess. Speaking of Richardson, this man is literally staring out into the void, and apart from this scene being, you guessed it, way too dark, there's also what is probably the funniest conflict that could possibly arise from the Japanese dub using the English subs. The English subtitles incorrectly subtitle one of Richardson's lines, which is in English.
If I'd known it would have come to this, I'd have killed you when first we met.
I don't really have anything to say about Richardson 2, except for the fact that they added a god-awful music sting to the animation of Richardson getting up. Kiryu also has maybe his dumbest moment in the whole game, where he says, "How do I get up to the roof?" before pausing and then remembering the elevator he took literally 5 minutes ago. I've already explained basically everything to do with Richardson's unarmed moveset in his first fight, but we still have to go over his third fight with his gun movesets. Well, I should say gun moveset, since Richardson no longer uses his shotgun moveset. Why? What is the point of taking this out? You have basically removed half of the fight and the entire fucking gimmick of him switching back and forth. In better news, Richardson is the only boss in the game to get an actual new dynamic intro. I think it looks cool, but he's completely silent, and we lost his iconic "Go to hell, let's do it" in the process. Since Richardson has no shotgun moveset anymore, all you're left with is his pistol moveset. It's been made much easier to handle due to your increased mobility and the lack of true knockdown immunity in this game. The fight still took me a whole 10 minutes to complete due to health scaling, and without the dynamism brought by Richardson's ability to switch movesets, it was a very boring 10 minutes. And as if things couldn't get worse, Richardson has another botched QTE port. The first half is fine, but the second half is sped up to the point where it cuts between camera angles at a blazing fast pace, making it both ugly and impossible to tell what's actually happening. Not to mention that the guns he uses in the QTE are different from the ones he has in the intro. They did Richardson so dirty. But hey, we have a big group of Black Monday guys to fight to make up for it. This is the only addition to the entire long battle. Once you're done with the first group, Kiryu shoots down a fighter jet with a rocket launcher because, like, sure? I'm pretty sure Black Monday is supposed to be an undercover shadow organization, but whatever, it's plus aura, I guess. After that is another big group of dudes, and that's it. All we have left is Mine. I was scared going into this fight. Having played the entire long battle, and hell, the entire game up to this point, and seeing just how bad they fucked with it, I knew they were gonna pull some bullshit with the Mine fight. I felt vindicated as soon as the pre-fight cutscene started. Mine's arena might actually be the worst looking area in the entire game. We are somehow simultaneously in the Void and in Mexico. This is not to mention how much the old PS3 animations do not work on Mine's new model. Even the intro to the fight itself is botched. It's a copy of the original one, but it has similar lighting issues, it's missing the electricity sound from the original, and a whole segment has been completely chopped out of it, which makes Mine and Kiryu just magnetize together. Don't even get me started on the fight itself. OG Mine is quite possibly the most mechanically deep boss fight in the whole series. He cycles between 3 different heat modes that must all be tackled differently. His default mode is fast and tricky, but he has solid openings if you know what to look for. His orange mode makes him even faster and dodgier, which makes him much harder to deal with, but his dodginess can be used to your advantage. His red mode gives him full super armor, which is normally a bad thing, but the brevity of this mode and the small amount of options that do exist make it so that you have to genuinely respect him without it feeling too bullshit. Not to mention that simply waiting it out for a short time until the QTE activates is also a valid strategy. And finally, his purple phase allows him to heal, but you can cancel this or even just try to outdamage his healing. The constant cycling between these modes leads to an incredibly dynamic and unforgettable gameplay experience. Kiwami 3 gets rid of all of these. He sticks to one moveset for 75% of the fight, which is just his player moveset in Dark Ties mixed with some of his original moves. This is not a bad moveset by any means, but it's far less interesting than the version from 17 years ago. Not helped by the fact that this fight is 20 minutes long! Now, you may dismiss this criticism by saying, just upgrade your damage. That's what the upgrades are there for. And I think that misunderstands why I avoided upgrading my damage in the first place. If I upgrade my damage to make the late game tolerable, I have essentially removed the ability to have fun in the early game. Do you want to see me beat Majima 1 with max attack? I am essentially sacrificing the first half of the game in order to make the second half playable, unless I never play New Game Plus ever. After like 15 minutes of doing the same thing over and over again, Mine will enter his QTE, which has been fully reanimated, to look like complete dog shit. I'm not gonna pretend like the mocap animation from the original has aged perfectly, but it doesn't look bad at all, and the additional visual and sound effects only add to its effectiveness. Visual and sound effects which are not in the remake version. They go for the same ending to the QTE in the remake as well, but just take a look. Even disregarding the missing effects, the original QTE shows Mine shattering his hand on Kiryu's forehead, while the new version just shows him being mildly annoyed that his punch didn't work. After the QTE, Mine enters Phase 2 where he goes into Dark Awakening, also from Dark Ties. This phase is meant to be a sort of parallel to his red phase from the original, but I'm not a fan of RGG trying to portray Mine as an edgelord. Let's be real here, Dark Awakening? The imagery of him breaking out of chains doesn't help either. I'll go more into detail about that when I do eventually talk about Dark Ties, but it's still applicable here. The Dark Awakening moveset is also just not suited to be a boss moveset. Most of the time, Mine is slow and lumbering, but every now and then he rips out his mortal attack which has insane rubber banding and deletes your health bar faster than it takes for Mine to hit the ground from the roof. That attack alone makes this phase 90% coughing baby, 10% hydrogen bomb. And as if the phase wasn't bad enough, Mine and Dark Awakening is the only boss in the game that cannot be aura broken. So the entire time you'll have to stick to short bait and punish strings with no opportunity for any kind of combos. After slogging through the fight for a good 20 minutes, your final treat is a horribly redone outro to the fight. The animation itself is not too bad, but the presentation is far worse due to the bad lighting and the complete lack of the moon in the final shot. The music in the original was also timed to the ending, and the gong sound effect that plays when a boss loses all of their health is also gone. None of this is helped by the fact that the scene abruptly cuts to black as opposed to fading out. Also, I forgot to talk about it, but the Fly remix is good. It feels like it's trying to be a little too hypebeast sometimes, but once again, Fly is an unremixable song, and I think they actually did a really good job with what they were given. I really can't stress enough just how bad the lighting looks in this ending scene. It's so unnatural and ugly. The fact that the only light source in the whole scene is one of the roof lights makes the whole thing look like it takes place at sunset rather than nighttime, and yet the whole thing looks like it's in the void. The subtitles still can't display Richardson's English voice lines correctly.
I'm afraid your role in all of this has come to an end. And unfortunately...
And one of Daigo's hardest lines has been replaced by some shit I'd expect to hear out of Deku from My Hero Academia. Richardson is also far less gory after getting shot, which makes him look way less menacing. The rest of the scene plays out as usual, but for some reason, the credits roll after this scene instead of the following one with Hamazaki. Combined with Ikizama being a very high-energy song, it creates quite the tonal whiplash with the quiet, reflective nature of the pre-credits scene. It's the exact same thing that Kiwami 2 did, except I can't show that one because that song is copyrighted. Very annoyingly, the credits are unskippable this time around. I guess to force you to listen to the song they probably spent a quarter of the budget on. And finally, all that's left of Yakuza Kiwami 3 is the final post-credit scene. You may have been able to tell, but I've intentionally avoided bringing up the fact that this scene is completely changed from the original, and is perhaps the most widely lambasted change in the entire game. But now is not the time. This scene, we'll come back to it, I promise. Ignoring that for now, that's it. That's Yakuza Kiwami 3. But we're far from done here. There's a few more things that I'd like to touch on before moving further. As for Amon, he's okay, I guess. RGG is still trying to figure out where they put their Dragon Engine Joe model, so they're still using Shen's model like in Infinite Wealth. The fight itself is not all that difficult, and is actually more fun than most main story bosses since he stays out of heat mode much longer than most others. Now technically, you're not supposed to be able to fight Amon without any attack upgrades since you have to complete the otherwise impossible Colosseum first, but I decided to use an insta-kill cheat to blast through the Colosseum to do it anyway. Amon took me 37 minutes to beat on standard difficulty. That's enough time to beat Shishido 4 times over with time to spare. Needless to say, don't do this. The last thing I need to do before moving on is give one final look at Kiwami 3's combat, as my opinion changed a lot between my first impressions of the demo and my final impressions of the full game. Though some parts of my opinion didn't change at all. Juggling still feels like an afterthought. I don't know why they even bothered adding it since they obviously don't want to work with it anymore. I did enjoy the mix of ground and stun combos, but the rage state was far too intrusive and made the game much less enjoyable overall. The glitch with face-down launchers still applies as well, and Kiryu only has the one face-up launcher. My opinion on the two styles flip-flopped a lot while I was playing the game, but I ultimately found Ryukyu's style to actually be the more interesting of the two. Having an actually functional launcher was a big plus, but the block cancelling mechanic was especially impactful in this style, as were the hold cancels even if they were a bit slower than DoD's. DoD was quite useful for its mobility, but its attacks were largely underwhelming outside of its hold attacks. It's worse at stunning, its attacks are worse at crowd control, block canceling is less impactful, and it can be hard to even just hit people sometimes. Even then, DoD is what I had to use most of the time, simply because it was faster and the mobility was necessary in most situations. I did find that some limited back combos were possible in Heat mode, but they were extremely inconsistent and only worked with a limited array of moves. Unless something crazy is discovered, Kiwami 3 has one of the lowest skill ceilings of any Yakuza game. Even if you wanted to go for cool combos or no damage this game, there's just no sauce to any of it. Another big thing I haven't mentioned is the glaring lack of heat actions in this game. In Tamashiro 2, for example, in Kiwami 3 you have access to a total of 15 if I counted correctly, whereas in the original Yakuza 3, you have 49. Do you see the issue here? I've already talked about how much worse some of the returning heat actions look, but ones like Essence of Terror and the parry heat action are completely butchered. Essence of Terror, or Essence of Dragon Muso as it's now known as, has had an entire segment cut out of it, meaning it only hits 3 enemies instead of 4. And the parry heat action is obviously unfinished considering that Kiryu literally pops into frame halfway through. I haven't even mentioned the fact that the parry is in this game because it's ridiculously hard to activate and you don't get any reward off of it except for this heat action. You also have 0 multi-enemy heat actions apart from the aforementioned Essence of Dragon Muso and the equivalent Essence of Ryukyu Muso. Both of these heat actions are basically the same and both are activated via taunting for whatever reason. So when you have a game with fewer heat actions than the original, blander and more homogeneous boss design than the original, repetitive and flowcharty 1v1 combat, and a non-existent combo game, with the only real upsides from the original being streamlined crowd control, floatier and less restrictive dodges, and good canceling options, do you come out with a fun and dynamic combat system? Kind of, for about 5 seconds before the hyper armor kicks in, at which point that is a definitive no. The only major gameplay improvement from Yakuza 3 that I would say Kiwami 3 has is that you're much stronger in the early game, and it thus avoids the issues that many players have with Yakuza 3 on new game. Yes, that is a meaningful change, but in my opinion, I'd rather play a really good game with an abrasive opening that isn't even a problem after your first playthrough over a really bad game with that edge smoothed out. Look, as much as I love Yakuza 3 and disagree with the people who say that it plays bad, I'm not gonna pretend like it doesn't have its problems. I'd like to see you try to beat Tamashiro without Komaki parry. And speaking of parry, I'm not gonna pretend like it isn't a crutch. It's not absolutely necessary, but it does circumvent a lot of problems that would otherwise be a big deal, such as Yakuza 3's notoriously low damage. But I don't see why that's supposed to be a negative. It still forces you to interact with the game by learning when it can and cannot be used. You also have to learn boss movesets and to be able to time your parries effectively. From there, you can start to maximize the reward you get from parries by practicing wall bounds and knockdowns. Those two combo types require you to learn the properties of the very arena that you're fighting in. If a game has a problem that can be solved by a fun and intuitive mechanic that further challenges the player to study other mechanics, is it even a problem at all? That question is as rhetorical as it is a bit oversimplifying. You don't always have access to parry, and the combat has other issues like a lack of mobility when in heat mode, difficulty dealing consistent damage on some bosses, and mediocre crowd control options, though certain equipment items can help with these problems. All of these issues still pale in comparison to the ones present in Kiwami 3. There's really nothing to learn. Parries are useless, so no need to learn them. Juggles last a whole 4 seconds, so no need to learn anything fancy even if you wanted to. All bosses play basically the same, so there's little to gain in terms of specialized knowledge for each. The skill floor and ceiling for ground combos are both so low that multiple cavers have been found dead between them. There's no strategy anymore. The game is so handholdy that I can practically hear it say, here's what you press when there's a lot of enemies, and when you fight a boss, this is when you can hit them. The game feels like it was designed to be beatable with the controller upside down. And don't take it from me, take it from RGG studio director Masayoshi Yokoyama. You have no idea how much this statement pisses me off. Throughout this video, I hope it has become clear that Kiwami 3 fails to adequately remake Yakuza 3 due to many factors. Despite coming out 17 years after the original, it plays, looks, and tells its story significantly worse. If I had to give it a rating out of 10 solely as a game and not a remake, I'd say it's a 5. While not unplayable, it isn't very fun, and it looks like complete shit. This rating is carried by the fact that it still tells Yakuza 3's story, which is great. As a remake, it's like a 1. It has some good things that I did like, but even then, every single thing in this version is such an appalling downgrade that there's no reason why you should ever play it over the original. That sucks, of course. I don't want a series that I love to have bad games in it. But whatever. This is just a reimagining of Yakuza 3. A good game that you can still play. Even if Kiwami 3 didn't stick the landing, it was always meant to stand alongside the original, not to replace it. That's what RGG themselves said it was meant to be. I don't recommend buying Kiwami 3, but I absolutely recommend the original. In fact, it's available right now on... Oh. Right. We need to talk about that. For nearly 3 hours now, I have graciously awarded RGG the benefit of the doubt on the pretense that Kiwami 3 was always meant to be an alternative to Yakuza 3. But I'm not stupid. I know it isn't, you know it isn't, RGG knows it isn't. Yakuza 3 is no longer available for purchase on digital storefronts. PC players still have GOG as an option, but console players are shit out of luck. So why? Well, money is the obvious answer, but it has a lot more implications than you might think. Remember those 3 categories of contextual problems I mentioned way back in the intro? This is where they matter. These 3 reasons are the why, so let's look at them. That third one is actually the easiest to go over. We're all aware of everything surrounding Kagawa, of course. Hiring and vehemently defending a sex offender that so blatantly defies the teachings your games have preached for 20 years now is telling enough of how RGG has abandoned their moral principles. But why? Why did they go to such lengths to do this? I feel like that's a question that we may never get a full answer to. At the very least, I can guess that removing him would have been impossible due to the time and budget constraints that were obviously a factor in this game's development. I don't have much more to say on this issue in particular. It's by far the most cut and dry, but the other 2 won't be as simple. Luckily, they are a bit of a combo deal, so let's talk about them. RGG has a history of lackluster remakes, and Kiwami 3 is not the only one with a small budget and short dev time. In fact, the Kiwami remakes are meant to be smaller filler titles that are made in between brand new releases. Kiwami was crapped out in 2016 before RGG officially made the switch to the Dragon Engine with Yakuza 6 that same year. The very next year, Kiwami 2 was released as a glorified asset flip of Yakuza 6. Hell, even Ishin Kiwami is really stretching the definition of a remake, because it literally is just the original game but worse. Kiwami 3 released a whole year after the previous big title, but RGG was also handling the smaller ports / re-releases of Zero, Kiwami, and Kiwami 2 as well, on top of them already being busy with the development of Virtua Fighter 5 and Stranger Than Heaven. But while the remakes being this slapdash is already bad enough, RGG seemingly intends these jerry-rigged mockeries to be the definitive versions of the originals. And when these new versions are declared to be the only ones you could ever need, they also become the only ones that are ever sold. Yakuza 3 is not the only victim of this. You wonder why Yakuza 1 and 2 have never seen ports to anything ever? Like usual, part of the answer is money. People are much more likely to pay for a shiny new version of an old game rather than a port of said game, and it's a lot easier to justify it being full price. Old games have a lot of stigma around them as being clunky and outdated, which, regardless of whether it's true or not, fuels the desire for them to be constantly renovated. You wonder why so many old games are getting remade nowadays? It's easier for the companies, of course, as remakes require drastically less planning and writing, and may be able to make use of pre-existing assets, but it's also because people keep buying them. There's a real demand for remakes either because of a lack of accessibility or a refusal to play the original versions. And that remake culture, I think, misses the entire point of video games as an art form. For RGG, money is only part of the reason as to why their remakes are the way that they are. All of the new stuff they added takes on a much more sinister connotation now that we know that Kiwami 3 is meant to fully replace the original. But I think that in order to fully explain what I mean, we need to go over that ending scene I skipped over. I've come around on the original version of the scene a bit. I still don't think that it's great. It's one last attempt at a thematic scene that rehashes a lesson Kiryu already learned from a different person in the previous game. Any tension established by this scene is also immediately undone by the post-credits scene. That said, I've come to appreciate how Hamazaki parallels Mine in the ending. Unlike Mine, Hamazaki lets his thirst for revenge consume him. Mine's final choice was an effort to right his wrongs after learning the error of his ways. Hamazaki is unable to do this, which only leads to him being worse off later on. And by the time he eventually lets go of his grudges, it's too late. This ending scene is not perfect, but what it tries to do at least fits with the rest of the game. And as if all of Kiwami 3's sins up to this point were not enough, it decides to end on a scene so insultingly unbelievable, bafflingly unsubtle, and laughably inconclusive that I struggle to put it into words. This is also going to get into a bit of Dark Ties' ending, so be warned. To start with what may be the worst cutscene ever put in a Yakuza game, Mine is here. You know, the guy that died 10 minutes ago and also 17 years ago is suddenly back as if nothing happened. How do I feel about this? Well, a long time ago, when I released my analysis of Yakuza 3, I stated how it seemed like RGG was potentially trying to build up to a Mine death retcon. I also said that such a retcon would not inherently be a bad thing. Mine's decision to jump off of the roof with Richardson does not necessarily hinge on him dying. The whole point was to save Kiryu and Daigo, which he did. The dramatic weight of the scene comes from Mine choosing to risk his life to do so. Whether or not he actually dies as a result is irrelevant. This being the case, a retcon would not inherently go against anything in Yakuza 3, and that still holds true. I am not mad at the fact that Mine did not die. I am mad at how and why they chose to change that. In maybe the stupidest move possible, RGG decided to have Mine survive by falling into a bush. Which, that's not how it works, but Kashiwagi survived this, so whatever. But the reason he shows back up in the way he does is because Mine is recruited by the Daidoji faction. A shady political force turned secret spy organization turned omnipotent immaterial god conglomerate a la the Patriots. The Daidoji faction was not introduced to the series until 7 years after Yakuza 3, and ever since Gaiden, it has been a heavily criticized plot convenience with vaguely defined influence. According to Kiwami 3, they have been around in their current state since at least 2009, and are able to perfectly hide someone's existence for 17 years outside of company-mandated aura farming. Not only is it bad enough to retcon a glorified plot device into existing far before we initially thought, but the use of the Daidoji faction to bring back Mine tells me that they have no real reason for doing so to begin with. They revived Mine because they could. The cutscene itself does absolutely nothing to wrap up the game you just played, and is nothing but the most obvious sequel bait I have ever seen. Mine contradicts the whole arc he just completed 10 minutes ago. It tells you nothing about what actually happens to the protagonist of the fucking game, and it even ruins any of the character growth that Hamazaki goes through, both in the original and in Yakuza 4. So why? Why make a scene so abhorrently antithetical to the very game you just finished playing, and especially the game that Kiwami 3 is a remake of? The answer to that is the entire reason I saved this scene until last. To everyone at home, I think it's time. Let's talk about revisionism. Revisions are a natural part of the writing process. Nobody makes things perfect on the first try. One of the greatest fears for any creator is the fear of putting their work out there. What will people think of it? What will people think of you? And certainly, part of that fear is the fear of being unable to change things. Once it's out there, you can't fix it. It's done. Full stop. It's not always possible to unrelease your own work, which is kinda ironic coming from a guy who did just that, but at least my remakes are actually good. What is true for most any art, but especially for something as high profile as Yakuza, is that no matter how much you try, and no matter how bad you want to, you cannot make a piece of art obsolete. And for some reason, video games are perhaps the medium where the opposite is most expected. And when I see Mine go off about being just another man who erased his name, I can tell that RGG wants nothing more but for Yakuza 3 to become obsolete. I've said the term 17 years a lot in this video, because that's the amount of time between the releases of Yakuza 3 and Kiwami 3. Do you know how long 17 years is? I was 2 when Yakuza 3 came out. I turned 20 this year. The amount of time between OG3 and Kiwami 3 is essentially my entire conscious life. I went through the entirety of elementary, middle, and high school, and got halfway through my undergraduate education in the time between these releases. 17 years of Yakuza 3's existence in its flawed yet ultimately beautiful form. 17 years of this game being loved and hated for what it is. 17 years dedicated to players like myself, who, in a million, could never truly explain how much I love this game. 17 years, and all RGG does in response is ask for a fucking do-over. Let's get real for a bit. In my analysis of Yakuza 3, I explained how part of why I love this game so much is due to how its themes of family and childhood trauma had helped me process my own experiences of abuse. Of all of the reasons I love this game, Mine is perhaps the most important and most personally impactful. RGG captured lightning in a bottle with him, and there's a reason why I spent a large part of my old video specifically talking about him. Mine's writing is pretty much perfect in my eyes. He has just the right amount of screen time to where you get to understand him and his motivations without it feeling too overbearing. Each of Mine's scenes has been intricately crafted to display exactly what it means to have a troubled childhood, and how the tainting of those formative years can influence your thoughts and behavior for the rest of your life. Out of any work that I've ever seen, Mine is the closest representation to what I have spent the majority of my life living. Mine is the one that I see myself in the most because his fear of abandonment, directionlessness, and breakdowns over loss of control are near one-to-one recreations of emotional gambits that I have personally gone through. Although he is nothing more than a collection of files on my computer, I understand this man and his struggles on a more visceral level than I understand parts of myself. That kind of representation and the catharsis it brings is one of the driving forces behind why we make art to begin with. I don't really care that Mine's story is mostly unchanged from the original. This is not the game I saw myself in, and it's nowhere near a suitable replacement. Do you see the problem here? Yakuza 3 is not something to be discarded because RGG is tired of it. But considering the entire reason that Kiwami 3 exists is to create a canon they consider more favorable for business and the story they now want to tell, they want to bury it. Yakuza as a whole has been going down a dark path in terms of its storytelling. Mine is, of course, not the only death retcon, and isn't even the first to come from this very game. Death does not mean anything anymore in Yakuza. You can always get daidoji'd back to life no matter how doomed of a scenario you find yourself in, as long as the character polls say it would be beneficial. This is something I may talk about at a later date, but let's not forget that the series used to have the opposite problem. Prior to Yakuza 5, I'd say, RGG was far too trigger-happy with killing off their characters. to the point where some potentially interesting character arcs were traded for narrative weight. I feel like Kashiwagi was one of their worst attempts at doing this, which is why it made sense for RGG to want to bring him back. And even when they did bring him back, he played a fairly small role. I feel like people were generally positive about this one, so they kept doing it for other minor characters. And now we're to the point where they're retconning major characters. If I was naive, I'd say that this is an attempt to utilize a promising character who didn't necessarily have to die. But I know that's not the case. Apart from the obvious, suddenly changing your mind about a character death 17 years after the fact is just bad storytelling. If after such a long time, graves can still be dug up, can anyone truly die? And if no one can truly die, what meaning does death have? Even beyond that, the narrative quality as a whole has taken a dip. Pirate Yakuza is, in my opinion, a mixed bag at best that hardly tries anything at all and isn't supposed to be taken seriously until suddenly it is. Infinite Wealth is pretty fun and has a really good narrative in the beginning, but the story begins to collapse under its own weight before face-planting right at the finish line. Gaiden is quite literally hype moments and aura the game. It is half of a good game, and the other half is nothing but filler combined with the combat system that rivals Kiwami 3 in shittiness. And now things are so bad that they're going back and revising history to fuck with the actually good games. You wanna know what tells me that Kiwami 3 is a cash grab more than anything else? For a game that is supposedly meant to be the definitive version of Yakuza 3, it fails to implement maybe the most well-known piece of content that was cut from the original due to time constraints. Hamazaki was very likely meant to have a boss fight in Yakuza 3, considering that you can fight him in both the All-Star Tournament and the Battle for Survival, modes that otherwise only contain story bosses. And the one thing they didn't do during their one chance to make changes to Yakuza 3 was add a Hamazaki boss fight. It's really sad seeing a franchise I love so much devolve into the next yearly slop fest as soon as it gained even a shred of popularity. But it's worth asking, are we owed good games? Does the artist owe anything to the consumer? Those are great questions, and I can't answer them. But RGG is just as much a company that sells products as it is a studio that makes art. I can't say for sure if the artist owes anything to the consumer, but I know for damn sure that the salesman owes a good product to the customer. So yes, RGG does owe us good games, because that's what we pay them to make. Do not do things that will piss off your customer base for no reason. That's not how you run a business. Things that piss off your customer base include going back and changing a story that they like to be worse, no longer selling a thing that they like in order to create artificial demand, and replacing said thing that they like with a more expensive yet lower quality version. RGG, stop doing that. All of this is to say that Kiwami 3 is not worth your time or your money. I'd tell you to go play the original, but that might be a bit difficult if you don't already own it. But even with this absolute pile of shit being our alternative, when it comes to the original, as intended Yakuza 3, you're never gonna hear me shut up about it.